Good afternoon. We're all on air? Thank you. We're all here. Welcome to everybody that's here. Pleasure to have you with us. Just a reminder, if you have your mobile, if you can have it switched off, as it does interfere. I can hear the echo. So it does interfere with our recording. Just want to welcome those that are online listening as well. Welcome to you and thanks for joining the meeting. In beginning the meeting, I just want to have a minute's silence for the late Tony Peck. As you'd all be aware, Tony was a very important part of our city, a mayor of this city, a deputy mayor of the city, but also had a lot of passion for our city and very committed to seeing change and to see development. So the part that I really remember from Tony is his mentoring and the way that he was willing to support, encourage, and was a very generous man as well in doing that. So I'd like to have a minute's silence now to remember the late Tony Peck. And thank you. Can I also pass on my condolences to his wife, Debbie, and to their family as well. Please be seated. Thank you. So I have one apology from Councillor Soward. Declaration of interest. Any declaration of interest to this agenda from our councillors? No? Confirmation of the minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes of the meeting held the 26th of November? Deputy Mayor moved, seconded Councillor Spencer. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. There are no deputations, no petitions. We do have a community report from Miss Gabriella Dewsbury, member of the Youth Advisory Group. Welcome to you, Gabriella. I can't see you. Yep, welcome.
Cool. Mayor, council officers, ladies and gentlemen, the Youth Advisory Group, or YAG, have had another very busy and exciting year. Like others, 2020 didn't exactly go as we had originally planned, but we have found new ways to voice youth problems and provide assistance to the youth in need. Earlier in the year, we had Kingsing Marketing join us to talk about all things marketing. They spoke about the marketing strategies and how they benefit our businesses here, as well as how we can have a strong social media presence and impact. We found that this was extremely beneficial with how the world and businesses are evolving around us. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, our meetings changed to an online forum with members joining in from their homes. We got our heads together and came up with a number of initiatives that would keep young people engaged with the local community while they were still in isolation. Our first idea was a Stay Home, Save Lives competition. Our first idea was this competition where we collaborated with West Tamar's Youth Advisory Group Council to implement it. The competition involved young people in Launceston posting a picture on social media of what they were doing at home during lockdown and using the hashtag Stay Home Save Lives Launceston. We ran the competition for 4 weeks and then a winner was drawn who won $100 for a JB Hi-Fi voucher. It was a great accomplishment for both youth groups and something we could definitely run again should there be another lockdown. During the pandemic, YAG also came up with the Young Local Legends campaign. This involved the community nominating a young person who showed strength and kindness during the pandemic. We then featured those nominated on Facebook and our newly established Instagram page. We had several local legends and it was a great success. In July, we said goodbye to Claudia, who had been the Youth Development Officer for the past 4 years. As she went on maternity leave, we were very excited, though, to hear when baby Charlie had arrived safely. We then welcomed Dana as her replacement and enjoyed reintroducing face-to-face meetings. We brainstormed what we hoped to get out of the remainder of 2020 and decided on the 1000 Hearts project. The idea came out when, as a YAG member, Charles highlighted the importance of kindness following the months of disheartening news. The 1000 Hearts project began in 2016, offering people a symbol of compassion and care. We sourced eco-friendly materials and made 100 hearts out of felt during our YAG meetings. At our last meeting, the group went around to Launceston CBD to distribute the hearts to local businesses and youth organisations. And here's a little example of what we had distributed, these little hearts. Everyone thoroughly enjoyed the project and it was a great way to finish our year. Next year, we are looking forward to many new opportunities and are welcoming new members to our group. Currently planned, we'll be going on a YAG camp on the 28th and 29th of January with a focus on team building and exploring our ideas and aims for 2021. We are also looking forward to receiving hoodies to grow our group's identity and interest within the wider community. Finally, we'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Deputy Mayor Gibson for his ongoing support and contribution to the group. He brings a wonderful energy and is an excellent resource for all of us to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the contribution you make to our council and through the Deputy. It is appreciated. And wish you all the best as you do your planning for the next few years. That's nothing to do with you. I'm not sure what the bell was for, but well done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So it's public question time. So time for the questions from the public.
How is the council planning to support the art and theatre industry following the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, thank you. We've already started. I mean, I don't think when you say following the COVID-19 pandemic, well, it hasn't quite finished yet and we're still in it, but Council is doing quite a bit already and will continue to do into the future. There's a number of programs we're supporting through the Launceston or Tasmanian artists, which obviously they've suffered greatly through this. Include the exhibitions at Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery, and I trust you'll get down to have a look at some of our local artists that have been encouraged there in the summer season program. The up-and-coming FOMA Festival, which Council is a major supporter of, will have a 95% of the program will be through locals, so that's something that we've been willing to get behind as well. And we've also got Music in the Park coming up, which you may have seen interviewed with a lot of promoted recently, and you'll see that there's a lot of local acts, or all local acts in that as well, which is important. So also, Council has provided direct additional funding support to Theatre North to help them through this period, and Design Tasmania to assist them to meet the financial challenges which the impact of COVID has been. So that's just some of the things that we're doing, and we'll continue to work with those as the need be. Thank you for the question.
How does the council plan to have safe events after COVID-19? For example, we would like to see a kite festival in Launceston, but feel there are too many restrictions to get something like this operating. How can this happen?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Council generally does not run events. It's something that we don't do generally. I mean, we may do the odd one every now and then, but what we do is support a lot of the events operators and those that want to run events, and obviously through finances, but also getting through the legal requirements, getting through all the impacts of the COVID and the restrictions that have to be there, because a number of events were cancelled, postponed, and some have been reimagined, which is great for us. And we've worked, our council events team have an event sponsorship program, has worked very closely with a lot of the organisers to make sure that any event will be COVID safe, and we'll continue to do that. Council can work with the responsible event organiser to provide a safe, vibrant and viable event. And one such support is the loan of hand sanitiser stations, provision of other hygienic materials and COVID-safe signage. Outdoor events are a little easier to coordinate, and both the event sponsor program and the event facilitation team would be very happy to discuss the requirements of a kite festival, should you wish to pursue it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Last month there was an attack on an individual on the news that I saw in the Kmart car park, and especially with all the violence and, you know, COVID blaming certain people, how is Launceston prepared to deal with racial discrimination in the future?
Thank you. Thanks for that question. Very important question, and obviously a topic that does come up every now and then in our community. The Council participates in the Launceston Safer Communities Partnership along with 18 other agencies from throughout northern Tasmania, which considers matters such as discrimination within our community. The Council will forward your question onto the Partnership Committee into the new year to receive a more specific response on the plans and actions which are being considered for implementation. So we'll continue to follow that up as well. Thank you.
How does the City of Launceston plan to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and people of colour in relation to the Black Lives Matter movement?
Thank you for that. The Council already actively works to support its community in accordance with its values of we care for our community. We regularly work with groups such as the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre, the Migrant Resource Centre and community groups to understand the issues which confront the members of our community and work with these groups to address them. The Council will be developing an Aboriginal partnership plan which will provide further direction on the means by which the Council can best work with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders communities into the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
We would like an update on any progress that has been made in implementing some of our ideas raised in our Youth Council meeting last year. For example, we highlighted installing bench seats and lockers for homeless people.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I've missed the Youth Council, Junior Council this year, so it was sad that we couldn't do it, but in the past it's been great to be able to be part of that. So following the meeting in August in 2019, the Council established a homelessness response group, which is made up of representatives from organisations providing services and support for people experiencing homelessness. These members have been meeting regularly with either formally or informally since October 2019. This group works through a range of issues facing homeless people, one of which is the possibility of installing lockers to protect the belonging of those who are homeless. We also work with the state government. We work quite a lot and have meetings with the state government, and we've been encouraging them to help us get a facility in the city, and they have, through COVID restrictions, got this facility now at City Mission where people are able to sleep and store their belongings, so which is fantastic news for our city. When the situation changes, if the issue, we'll continue to look at whether we need a permanent facility or whether there'll be lockers, and hopefully it'll be incorporated into some permanent facility into the future. Thank you. Any other questions?
Mr Mayor, Robin Smith on behalf of Coffee Republic, a cafe in the Brisbane Street Mall. I've got two questions not on notice, both about graffiti. Currently, council does remove graffiti on property, whether it be private or council property, or whichever government agency owns it, if the words are deemed rude or offensive words. Unfortunately, as it stands, a swastika by council isn't considered an offensive word because it is a symbol, not a word. Is that something council could look at, please?
I'm happy to look at that. I mean, if you let us know where it is. I mean, we generally work that we were made aware of where the graffiti is, then and type of graffiti, we respond very quickly, which I've had good compliments from people in the public. So if we're made aware of it, for sure. So if you can make us aware of the locations, we're more than happy to follow that up.
Just a follow-up question. It's more about the categorisation of the swastika isn't removed by council because it's not deemed an offensive word.
Oh, we can get a response to that.
Now, with you will have noticed over the last 3 or 4 weeks what I would call an explosion in graffiti spray paint. There's probably 4 or 5 individuals in Launceston conducting it at the moment. I've never seen so much graffiti. I'm asking if council will consider expending more time and funds towards the detection, reporting and removal of this on all property in the city, not just whether it's a piece of no man's land, of course, council property, or if it's indeed a landlord who's rich but perhaps absentee. Is that something council would spend more time, funds and resources to remove?
We haven't considered that. Obviously we'd have to have a discussion on that and to see what the intent. You want to add anything, Jess?
No, it's something we need to investigate.
Need to investigate. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the public? No one out there? Thank you. Under the provisions of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to items included in the agenda item 9. So we have 9.1. No speakers for 9.1. Moved Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Deputy Mayor. Councillor Mackenzie, you wish to speak to it?
Could I just start with a question?
You certainly may.
My question is just in relation to the parking issue. We had a good conversation on site this morning regarding, and I just wouldn't mind the officers explaining the rationale behind this development not requiring parking as part of that development.
So the rationale for not having parking directly associated with this essentially is that there's a large amount of parking in the area that varies a lot over time. So there's a number of public car parks, there's going to be a paid car park across the road, there's parking on the street, and essentially this sort of use can also tie in with the existing hotel car parking. So just having that range of car parking across the area and such a large amount of it, it's considered appropriate. There's none specifically set aside for this use.
Thank you. So I will now speak to the item, and thank you for that response. So I think it was very useful this morning, and I think when you look around the area...
Are you speaking now, just so I know?
Yes, I am.
Yep, thank you.
Sorry.
Cool.
When you look around the area, you see actually there is a significant amount of car parking, therefore to actually put more car parking there is actually detrimental to the actual area, I think, in general. So I'm comfortable with the response given and noting that a lot of that car parking is free, is used by commuters and all sorts of different other people. So I guess if there's an issue with parking down the track, there's parking restrictions that can be meted at some stage. So I'm comfortable with the response given by the officer. I've looked through the development application, and quite frankly it's on an existing property, and it's just, I guess, extension to an existing property, and other than the two areas where the property comes down onto public land or council land, it's contained within the envelope of the existing Silos Hotel. So as a consequence of that, I'm comfortable that the development actually fits and it actually complements what goes on that site, and is an appropriate development application to approve on behalf of council. So I think that a number of issues made by the representors are similar to representations that we've received on lots of things that go on in Inveresk about flood inundation and so forth. I think that the reality is we've had technical advice in regards to the flood mitigation circumstances on that site, and therefore we make approvals based on that professional advice that we've received. There's a comment about poor process, which I think I was quoted as having said some time ago in regards to Riverbend Park. I'm happy to be quoted on that because I felt that we did have poor process, but that was operational on how we actually did a development. This is not poor process in relation to how a development application is actually being formulated. I think the proponent has put forward a development application. It's been appropriately assessed by our officers. All of the areas that needed to be looked up under performance criteria have been assessed according to the performance criteria, and there aren't that many of those in that case. So as a consequence of that, I think proper process has been done in regards to a full investigation of the development application that's been put forward by the proponent, and therefore I'm satisfied to support the DA as it is lodged.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Just briefly, this proposal for the construction of an enclosed function centre catering for 200 people, to my mind, does meet the planning scheme. I note the 4 standards requiring council discretion in building height, landscaping, flood impact, and it has been mentioned by the mover car parking numbers. Certainly appreciate the reliance on performance criteria and the way that the assessing officer has dealt with those 4 items, and I think for me that the proposal, whilst not providing dedicated parking spaces for use, demonstrates that there is sufficient parking for the 200 patrons that would be using the site, and I recommend and support the motion to the table.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. While I accept the comments of previous speakers that this is, that as far as the parking goes in this area, there does seem to be more than adequate parking. I do think that there's easily be confusion in terms of we have a certain amount of parking at the Riverbend Park. I suppose ostensibly for people using Riverbend Park, that would seem to become a very convenient location to park if you wanted to also use the hotel or the function there. So I feel as though there could be sort of, I've certainly been in that car park plenty of times when it's busy, struggle to find a parking spot there sometimes. So I'd certainly ask the council to take note of that and make sure that the people who use that parking space are there specifically for that might be difficult. And I can accept the arguments that yes, there does seem to be plenty of parking in the area. There seems to also be, room, on Crown land for further parking on the riverbank as well. So that wouldn't seem to be a problem. I'm certainly more concerned about the fact that we continue to develop. In this case, it's already an existing property, but it is an extension of a development in a flood-prone area. This is something that the council will have to continue to deal with. It might be something that we have to address far more urgently than we are at the moment. In this case, it's an extension to an existing building, so I suppose it doesn't make the problem any worse. But new developments in the area can and will make this problem worse. It's something that we can't walk away from, we can't ignore. As much as we might like to see development in the area, it's difficult, it's problematic, and it may certainly come back to bite us as a council. So in this case, I will be supporting the development application. One further point, I suppose, to note, I just have some concerns. I mean, the silos have been long a part of the city's vista, and in many ways the development that has occurred there didn't detract from that. And I suppose I would express some minor concern that this development will, I suppose, impede that vista of that building, as much as it might not make much of a difference, but I'd be interested to see the result of that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. Just really quickly, I'd stand to support this application. I'd just like to point out in regards to parking and needing additional parking, the slab is currently operating as a function centre. A marquee goes on it and 200 people will go in and have a function. So it's already having that operation. By putting a hard roof on top, I don't think we need to do anything more with parking. And I think it'll actually look better from a vista point of view, having a grey function centre rather than a white marquee. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 9.2. We do have a speaker for 9.2, Ashley Brooke.
I speak in favour of the recommendation. So the recommendation will enable a revised housing proposal to be considered by the Tasmanian Planning Commission as part of the rezoning process for the site, including a further public exhibition period, given a number of changes that have occurred in response to Council's original decision on the application. The proposal is seeking to provide suitable housing that will satisfy a growing need for more social and affordable housing, in which protects the amenity of residents of the site and the surrounding area as well. The changes will reduce the number of dwellings from 24 to 18 and provide for conformity with Council's planning scheme as well. The dwellings along the northern boundary of the site have become single storey as a result of the changes, so that provides and also have a greater setback from the northern boundary as well. So this ensures that the development overall is contained within the prescribed building envelope under the planning scheme, and also deals with the privacy issues in accordance with the planning scheme requirements. Just a couple of other things. So the private open space at ground level has also been increased within the development as a result of the reduced number of dwellings, so provided increased scope for additional open space. Also increased scope for external storage as well, which was an issue in the previous decision. So additional storage sheds are provided as part of the revised development. And finally, the number of parking spaces per dwelling has increased as well. So each of the single-storey dwellings gets a second external car parking space and 4 visitor spaces within the development as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move Councillor Mackenzie, second to Councillor Finlay. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I do, and I'd just like to commend the proponent for the work they've done. I think we raised some valid concerns when this first came to the table a number of months ago about the scale of development and the number of development units on there and space I think all of the things that we raised way back then they've taken on board and gone away and reduced the number of units, as the Speaker said, from 24 to 18, which now makes it a much more acceptable issue. It's probably still always going to be challenging for people who live in the immediate area from the perspective of having affordable housing and I guess the psychological view of what that means to some people. The reality of it is we can't continue to put affordable housing all in one place and see that as, they are part of our community, and we need to ensure that appropriate levels of affordable housing is spread throughout our community. Whether we want them next door to us is always an issue that whoever is going to end up beside people will have concerns and possibly genuine concerns in some areas. But the reality of it is we still need to provide this housing for the people who live in and around our community, and it saves some of the opportunities of reducing homelessness and a number of other issues which I think are hugely important issues in this town. So I'd like to commend the new proposal put forward by the proponent, and we'll be supporting that today.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mayor. I also rise today to support the motion before us, and whereas Council Mackenzie has commended the proponent, which I think is appropriate, actually I think in this instance we also need to commend Council. It's always really confronting where as a planning authority we're provided with an opportunity to support the investment of increased stock of affordable housing for our community, and where we're faced with such deep discretions that we are not able to support it. That can come with negative community conversation around there's clearly a need for this housing stock in the community, and when you're not in a position to support it, that's challenging. So I commend us for making a clear decision previously and then communicating directly with the proponent, and the proponent responding, and appropriately so, should be commended for the response they've made on all of the discretions and providing us with the opportunity for a much improved planning outcome, which will improve the amenity for the individuals and families that will have this opportunity to live in this community and to create a community in this area and enjoy the opportunity to participate in the housing environment. And that, so therefore it's a great planning outcome, but it's also a great outcome for our community. So I commend Council in the tough times of creating decisions that are not necessarily supported, but through the process we're able to ensure that there are better planning outcomes achieved. So to Council and to the proponents, well done, and I support this motion.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. The first thing I'd like to start with, and I don't need to unpack this topic, but we are they and they are we from my perspective. The issue for me in terms of both parts A and B of this particular item that comes before us, I obviously support what the officer is saying in terms of the original refusal of the development application, and like the speakers before me, I believe the outcome is certainly an enhanced outcome for the community. But what I also note is that the revised proposal, which does have substantial changes to that was on public exhibition, if indeed the Commission supports this approach and the recommendation to overturn the previous, then it itself will require further exhibition, and I think that's important just from a community transparency perspective. I certainly appreciate all the work, all the conversations that have gone on that have seen us arrive at this point, and I also too think that decision taken in May to separate the two components was a great one and has seen very good outcomes from a planning perspective as a result. So recommend both A and B, both 1 and 2, noting the significant change that's occurred there.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, like the other speakers, I also rise to support this and congratulate the proponent for making changes. As others have said, it always is a difficult thing to initially disallow something when the planning officers say it meets the guidelines within reason, and perhaps we felt that was unreasonable. So I think What I'd really like to see is that the new community that will be established there get integrated into the greater Youngtown community. It will be a mixture of rental and purchased houses. There will be a mixture of older and younger people in that new community. There will be kids going to school. There will be some older people that will be home all day. There will also be some workers from the City Mission building right next door. So I do think that this is a great outcome from where we started, and I commend it to everyone else to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I won't repeat what other speakers have said, but I will just say, what a great thing when Council asked a developer, Catholic Care Tasmania, to go away, that we get such a positive outcome when we get to see a new approach taken that takes into account some of the concerns that were previously expressed. I note with interest that City Mission have also taken over the gardening centre adjacent to there, so it is quite a little sort of compound now that seems to be... oh, that's where it's been built. So it's only temporary. Oh, okay. Well, nonetheless, I thought that was the land in between. My apologies. But nonetheless, there is a small community sort of potential there, and I'd certainly encourage the development to go in that direction. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. I agree with what everyone's comments are. I will be supporting this. I had great concerns before, but now they've got storage area, more parking, and from 24 to 18 is definitely a big improvement. It won't be as crowded, so I will fully support it. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Yeah, I will briefly, and just thank you everybody for your comments made. And I think I just reflect back on a meeting we had a couple of weeks ago where there was an issue about a gated community. And I think I made comments in regards to the community is actually the people who live in it, and how they actually associate with each other. And I would hope that, again, this stigma of whatever we talk about isn't something that happens. And I think at the end of the day, if everybody goes out there and said, I want to meet my neighbour and spend some time with them, that's what will form the community, and all of the other issues will actually fall by the wayside. So I think that it's fantastic. I think we've got a better outcome with less jammed in spaces, which I think will therefore make that community flow a lot better, and I think actually interact much better with its existing community around it. So I look forward to the vote.
Thank you. I'll put to the vote. All those in favour? That's all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 9.3. And we have a speaker, David Merrington.
Mr Mayor and councillors, my name's David Merrington, and 177 Ravenswood Road in Launceston here. Firstly, I must say I have great respect for Gerard Hextall with this high standard of development in Waverley Road and now 179 Ravenswood Road. My only concern with the building is the 10-metre height. My wife Pamela and I would like to see this reduced to say 9 metres. Our house is heritage listed and don't want the 1860-70 house blocked to the view of the general public. Thank you. That's all I've got to say on the matter.
Thank you for being very much to the point. Appreciate that too. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So 9.3, somebody happy to move a motion? Councillor Finlay, is there a seconder? Deputy Mayor. Councillor Finlay, wish to speak to it?
I do, thank you, and I want to acknowledge the great approach that the representative has made to presenting his concerns around this development. I believe that the assessment is included in our papers, outlines where the discretions have been considered with building height, setback, the siting, the streetscape, the use, the excavation and the risk. When we read the report and we've been on site, there is a substantial change to the form that this development application brings to the precinct, the area. However, on review of the bulk and the size and deep consideration for the importance of the property that you own up behind, I believe that there is reasonable expectation that this form will sit into the landscape, that the community will still be able to enjoy viewing the residential property behind, which is significant and important, and that in fact the almost enveloping of this site will neaten up the area and not make it inconsistent with the other light industrial developments happening in the area. So I acknowledge that it will be a serious change to how the landscape presents now, but on review of the documentation and a site assessment, I believe that it will be reasonable.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Just briefly, Mayor, and certainly appreciating the Merringtons and the additional representation that was received. Following on from Councillor Finlay, the other significant issue which was raised in the representations was that of noise, and I thought it was certainly an improvement and an enhancement to that, and an additional site with regard to the affixing of the noise-sensitive reverse beepers, which I think will certainly improve the amenity, and was raised in a couple of the representations. So I think that too was a good outcome, and obviously goes to some of the regard that Mr Merrington has for his neighbour.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor, and I do appreciate the representative David Merrington, and I acknowledge what he says is somewhat true, that the magnificent property there will be less visible from the road. This is just the unfortunate result when we have different properties, different zonings. This is always liable to happen. I don't know if this property originally would have owned all of that land all the way down to the road, may well have done, considering that's the way it's facing. And while I do appreciate the request that to shave 1 metre off the top could be something that's possible, could be something that the developer has already taken into consideration or would like to, but unfortunately in this situation that's not a consideration that the council can make with the different zonings. So certainly appreciate the sentiments that have been expressed. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, probably am going to repeat because I didn't realise that's what you were going to say, but I think I take on board Mr Merrington's comments, but under the planning scheme 10 metres is an allowable height, therefore we don't actually have any discretion to say drop a metre off it. So the reality of it is, unless the proponent wishes to do that, we have to assess it on what they put for it, and therefore the 10 metre height range is acceptable under the solution under the Planning Act, unfortunately.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Finlay, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 9.4. We do have a speaker for 9.4. Helen Tate.
Mr Mayor, Deputy Mayor and all the councillors present. I was to present for Paul and Marie Lynn Bishop, who are neighbours to the development. Unfortunately, their statement hasn't come off the web for me to have to say, but I'm putting in a presentation too, so I think I will have covered many of their points. So for them, they were talking about the fence, the wall, and on the wall was the washing line, and I think these have been covered by the planner. I think they're well covered, but then they move on to the really emotive, distressing points where their privacy will be quite extensively impacted. Their view and their outlook will be impacted, and their sunlight. So we again have that sort of that anguish of your life quality being quite substantially changed. And Paul was speaking for his neighbour that side and his neighbour the other side. So I just want to speak for him in that in a discretionary development there is some responsibility to make sure neighbours are satisfactorily catered for or not too severely impacted. So that being said, Mr Mayor, I haven't got his report, but it will be in the minutes with you, I hope.
Yep, it's in the report.
And then, Mr Mayor, I'm going to be a bit cheeky when I present mine.
Okay,
I think it will be...
Start 2 minutes now.
Yeah, I think it will be just on about 2 minutes, but if I can take some of that other time from...
No, sorry, we were just about up. The time was nearly up, so you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, just let me get my glasses on then. So, Mr Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Councillors, firstly, I just want to express an appreciation for DA for Burke Street, that the councillors saw fit to invoke the discretionary provisions of the planning scheme that allowed for consideration of heritage and residential amenity. I just want to report briefly that the consequences of that decision were swift and productive and successful. The applicant sold very quickly and lucratively and moved very, very soon to a suitable family house. Heritage walls still standing, my privacy and my access to a lighted outlook is maintained, and the neighbourhood stresses, which we've all been talking about here today, how important neighbourhood is, for complications of a build on a compromised block have been waylaid. So the DA for Church Street proposes the demolition of a signature little house and a garden.
So, excuse me, are you referring at all to 20 Church Street? This is what we're on about today.
Yep, that's what I'm talking to.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to say that while I had the chance, but I'm time to run out. DA for Church Street proposes a demolition of a signature home and a garden breathing space, and its building tower and 2 stories of cement in a gentle, characterful and established leafy green locale. The proposal to remove the attractive existing house would markedly change the profile of the streetscape and would interfere with their outlook. Unfortunately, it seems there's nothing in the conditions brought forward by the planners that can truly alleviate the negative effects of a proposal that inserts the bulk of 2 stories 9 metres high on ground level in this area when it's primarily single-storey living. I'm concerned for the reduction of residential amenity, the quality of life and outlook for the neighbourhood. We must be ground-dwelling people. The height is not the first answer to good living, and the representatives keep saying the apartment building, they said if it was kept to a single story, it would alleviate most of the objections to development.
Yep, thank you. Your time is up. Thank you. Your time is up. Thank you.
I just want to appeal to the planners that I want to keep asking that...
No, sorry, your time is up. If you could sit down, please.
I'll put it as a question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other speakers for 9.4? Anyone happy to move a motion for 9.4? Deputy Mayor moved. Seconded Councillor Walker. Wish to speak to it, Deputy?
Look, just briefly, I certainly appreciated the number of representations that were received. Many of them were, I guess, concerned about the demolition of what is perceived as being a very livable home. Obviously, it's not our determination as to what one wants to do with the structure. It is not heritage listed, and therefore, if indeed the developer wishes to apply for it to be demolished, so be it. I also note condition 3 with regard to the existing concrete wall. That too was a significant issue that was raised in many of the representations with regard to its boundary with Rockland Place, and I note that a suitable structure shall be provided and or similar replacement reinstated at a similar height above the ground, and for many that will provide some certainty with regard to the issues that they were noting. I think it's important to analyse the situation that it is a difference to what is there at the moment, and we're going to continue to see more applications for this sort of development. But I certainly appreciate the lengths that the developer, working with council officers, has gone to. I think in terms of the standards that are requiring discretion in this instance, there could have been a whole lot more, and appreciating the depth that the developer and the assessing officer has gone into to look at those issues is appreciated. I guess in summary I would say that change is inevitable, and some of us don't like change, but I appreciate that this is going to be a significant and substantial residential development of the highest quality, and I think that the conditions that are provided within this DA and as are recommended are the ones that we should be supporting today, so I offer my support to the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And yes, change is one of those constants in life, I suppose, that if you think that you can't change, it'll be thrust upon you. And in the case of up to 8 neighbours, it's an interesting block of land that goes quite deeply off Church Street. Yes, there'll be some impact upon them, there's no doubt. And look, looking at the dwelling that's there now, it's easy to look at that and think, well, that's a perfectly good house, well, why wouldn't you keep that? But this is what we are facing in Launceston. There is change. This is an appropriate use of this land. It's a large, deep block that will accommodate a suitable development that will have minimal impact, not no impact, but minimal impact on its neighbours. I'd be the first to stand up here and defend that property if I thought that saving that would somehow improve Launceston's heritage. It'd certainly be a shame to lose these places, but they can't all be protected. We can't stay in stasis in this city. Things do move on, and this is an appropriate use of this land. But what I would like to say, and the reason that I did second this, is to give myself an opportunity to acknowledge that this building does contain material that's of use, perhaps to other people, and I would impeach and implore the developer to consider that if and when this building is demolished. There are weatherboards, there are bricks, there's roofing, there would be no doubt hardwood beams, probably hardwood floors, doors, windows, what anyone would expect to see from a perfectly habitable building. And these are things that are potentially in demand for people who are renovating, people who are wanting to build or extend. And so not only would I ask that the developer consider finding ways to recycle that material in the highest form possible, but I'd also like the council to consider ways in which we could help to facilitate such things, because this won't be the last, of course, property that has these well-built features contained within them. And if there's anything that the council can do as part of its circular economy, as part of its sustainability measures, then I, for one, would encourage the council to participate in that process, and thereby, providing some alternatives and some future use for what, is a sustainable future for our city. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Just to point out that we are sitting as a planning authority, and the matter that you've just raised is something that Council's already involved with the circular economy. It's actually working well with the NTDC and the other councils and businesses right through the community. So, thank you. Any other speakers? No? Deputy Mayor, wish to close?
Thank you, Mayor, and I too also think that the comment raised by Councillor Walker is an appropriate one, just to remind the developer that it would be a desire of Council to see that the materials that could be reused could be salvaged. I want to say that I appreciate the contributions made from around the table and appreciate the conditions with regard to screening and privacy that are contained within the item that we're considering, and also just to raise the topic that is always a topic of great consideration, but unfortunately not one that's contained within the planning scheme, that never-ending situation of view. Many of the representations, as councillors would be aware, referenced view in the comments that they made, and I just remind all of the representatives that view is not something in the purest sense that's contained within the planning scheme. We appreciate the comments that have been raised, and I believe that many of the representations and their reference to the wall, to screening, to privacy have been adequately dealt with in the conditions contained.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Go to 9.5. So we have a few speakers. Carlo Paulson.
Afternoon, Mayor and Councillors. My name is Carlo Poslon and I'm the owner of 10 Thrower Street, West Launceston. I have concerns about the nature, style and positioning of the proposed development by the applicant, and I also disagree with the Council Assessor's review of the development, particularly in relation to its assessment of the various performance criteria. I believe that any house built should be designed and positioned with respect to one's neighbour's amenity. My assessment of the applicant's proposal is that it is driven by the desire for the construction of a commercial rental, short-term or not, and comes with enormous constraints given the small lot size and the steepness of the block. The net effect of this is that the proponent has requested that Council allow relaxation of planning rules that enable the development to proceed. The consequence is that the development, if allowed to proceed in its current format, will have a detrimental effect to the neighbouring properties and forever alter the residential character of the street. I've submitted various documents illustrating how dominant the proposed residential development would be when viewed from 10 Thrower Street, and ask that they be carefully considered. The small block size, combined with the site topography constraints, is not sufficient reason to allow a relaxing of planning guidelines with respect to boundary offsets, and I respectfully request that the Council enforce that the side boundaries be increased to the approximate 5 metres, which should be required under the planning instrument considering the height of the buildings. I also ask that direction is given to the more appropriate siting of the residential dwelling, thus alleviating my concerns around privacy and the golden elm tree I refer to as a tree of significance. There have been numerous submissions of objection to the development, with nearly every allowable house objecting to the short-term visitor accommodation. There are only 8 houses on Thrower Street and over 9 children who live there, and the development is overwhelmingly unwelcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Terry.
Afternoon, everyone. As the owner, applicant and designer of the proposal for 12 Thrower Street, I would just like to say that careful consideration has been taken into the general aesthetic nature of the area, given the protectionism over the gorge and the privacy that the proponent speaks of just previously. We're 20 metres away from their nearest dwelling, and I've put the smallest possible windows on that side of the house for that very reason, and the same on the visitor accommodation, which I've noted is marked as future, which won't be constructed anytime soon, but that's besides the point. And that the area itself lends itself to a holiday accommodation unit that doesn't take away from the local rental market. If approved, I will be moving into the dwelling and that will become my home. The last thing I want to do is to have something behind me that is going to upset me and my future family. So obviously I'm for this development. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the speakers I have for 9.5. Someone happy to move a motion? Until we get a motion, we can't. We've got a lot of questions, but no motion. So, no one's happy to move. Moved, Councillor Harris. Seconded, Councillor Spencer. Councillor Harris. Oh, sorry, with questions. We'll do the questions first. Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. When we visited the site today, we saw the golden elm that's in question. I'd like to understand how that tree will be protected whilst this development is undertaken.
Thank you. So, who's Duncan, isn't
it? Thank you. We've got a condition on the, proposed for the permit requiring reasonable measures to be taken and a plan to be provided for how that tree will be protected. There is an Australian standard that provides guidelines on how that should be undertaken and what steps should be undertaken. We've also got to remember that it is a tree on the neighbouring property. Protection of that tree also relies on a certain amount of goodwill from the applicant. There is other legislation that can counter that if it becomes a problem. So we've got reasonable conditions on there, asking for a landscape plan and a management plan to be provided before any works start.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm not sure how we'll go about the question and the answer, but practically, I'm wondering if it could be explained with the inclusions in the document around the construction of the driveway and the challenges with the driveway to progress further through to the future proposed visitor accommodation. If it is in fact intended to only construct the home, then how does construction of the future visitor accommodation happen? Question mark.
Is that Richard or? Duncan.
Thank you. Very difficult one, that. Clearly, when you look at the site, it's going to be a difficult task to build the house first and then potentially build the visitor accommodation unit later on. It's not a matter for the planning scheme to regulate how they do it or what sequence they do it in. If the developer believes that he can build the house and has a method of building the visitor accommodation unit later, that's not something we actually have an active role in. I'm not sure if you would like to invite him to comment on how he proposes to do that, but that might be something beyond the realms of today's meeting.
No, all right, thank you. Another question, Councillor Finlay?
Thank you. And I think the time to have a mover and a seconder and then the number of questions, this is clearly an application that's been assessed as appropriate, but it's tricky, so there's a question. So my next question is, given the questions that were asked on the bus this morning and the trickiness of the development and the concerns potentially with future use of the visitor accommodation piece, is it possible for council as a planning authority, if it's not the intention of the proponent to build the visitor accommodation at this time, to consider approving part of the application, being the home, without provision for approving the visitor accommodation?
Thank you. Richard.
The simple answer to that would be no. The application needs to be considered as a whole. It's too significant a change to warrant removing an entire element.
Councillor Harris, question?
Thank you. Yes, just a question to follow up on that is how long will the development application approval for the visitor accommodation remain in force, and how long can it be extended to? Because Mr Terrier said he's not going to build it straight away.
Richard.
There's two questions there. How long would the permit be valid if no construction was commenced? Well then, ultimately you get about 6 years with all the maximum available extensions. Once you commence, and should the house be built, the ability to build the accommodation unit will be forever. There will be no time limit. So at any point after the house is substantially commenced, you could do the unit.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay with a question.
Just processing this in my head. So if there are rules about being able to resubmit development applications if an application is refused, but if someone's invited to resubmit without the second item, would that be a substantial change and therefore allowable?
Richard.
If you're asking that if should council refuse the application today, could it be resubmitted just as a single dwelling? That's a matter of tribunals and future courts, but in my view, it would be a significant change which would allow resubmission. I don't think there would be a prohibition on resubmitting a single dwelling.
Councillor Harris, do you wish to speak to it, the item?
Clearly this is, thank you, and thank you for all the questions, because clearly this has been an interesting one, and we've all learnt a bit along the way, I'm sure, as I have. Because The development application as presented and probably as originally assessed by ourselves was for a house and the accommodation unit to be built behind it, and logic would seem to indicate that perhaps you would build the accommodation at the same time at the back as the house. Simply because from a building point of view, you have one building site. Once you have your house established, to then have to try to build that unit at the back would be very difficult because you'd have to be carrying everything up and down there, you'd have no machinery, etc. But it does seem to give him an unlimited approval time for the development of such a holiday unit because he substantially built his house, he's substantially started the development application, and so that's an interesting outcome. I moved this motion simply to enable the questions to be put, because otherwise from a procedural point of view we wouldn't have been able to have those questions. So I might just leave it there at this time and perhaps come back and speak at the end once others might have their opportunity to speak. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Spencer? No? And question, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I would just like a little further information with regard to the visitor accommodation classification. I note that this visitor accommodation unit must not be converted into long-term residential use, and I wish to understand the nature of that in terms of the conditions that are approved today if this was to be approved as visitor accommodation. So what certainty do representatives, the community and us have to ensure that the use is maintained into the life of that particular visitor accommodation unit?
Thank you. Richard, is that you?
Similar to all other conditions on permits, there will be an option to enforce if council becomes aware that the occupancy restriction is being breached. And there are powers that council could prevent it being occupied permanently or being occupied as a single dwelling. Similar to a caretaker's dwelling or other scenarios where single dwellings are not allowed but limited residential is allowed. There are a number of scenarios where that occurs, and it requires council to be aware, but there is enforcement should it be necessary.
Thank you. Appreciating that response. A subsequent question. Are there any processes or pathways afforded to the owner to have the use converted at a latter stage?
Richard? Not under the current planning scheme. Under subsequent planning schemes, they may well open up, but not under the current planning scheme for multiple dwellings.
Thank you. Councillor Walker has a question.
Yes, just a procedural question, I suppose. Considering this is our final meeting of the year, there's no room really for laying this on the table, is there? And you know, in terms of the planning clock, I'm presupposing, but I'm happy to hear an answer to that question.
Thank you. Richard? CEO.
Thanks, Mayor. So just reading the agenda, it looks like the deemed approval date is the 27th of December, so you have got time. There's no meeting scheduled. The council has the legal ability to call a special meeting should it choose to do that. That's entirely at the discretion of the council, and that could be done on I think it's 2 clear days' notice to be able to make that happen. But in answer to the question, it's certainly a possibility.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor Harris with a question.
Yes, my question was simply in regard to the definition of long-term accommodation. At what point does week-by-week Airbnb become long-term? Is it 3 months, 6 months? The power goes on in the renter's name or whatever. So I was just wondering how the practical enforcement of such a condition is able to be done by council's enforcement officers.
Duncan, I think he's going to answer that.
Thank you. When we're interpreting things like this, short-term for us means up to 3 months. Anything longer than that is considered long-term.
Thank you. Do we have any speakers? Councillor Walker.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I did appreciate hearing from the proponent and developer, planner, designer, as it sounded like. And he might well be sitting out there feeling rather frustrated at the moment, having some answers to some of the questions that we're asking, but not able to convey them at this stage. One big question for me is, there's a substantial tree on that property, and I'm unsure as to whether that tree will stay or go. Beg your pardon? Yeah. And I'm unsure as to how the developer would go about constructing the lower part of this dwelling and then accessing the rear part without any driveway. Would that include potentially having to go over someone else's land in order to do that? Maybe. I don't have answers to those questions. So it makes it a very difficult, well, a somewhat difficult decision, a very difficult decision, I suppose. I appreciate some of the comments from the representatives. However, in theory, I'm comfortable with the development. There are similar properties across that small valley, looking across Basin Road. There are not dissimilar styles of houses. I don't think in any way that it impedes the character of the area. I think it's an appropriate size development in a lot of ways. I just have some concerns that aren't being answered in this process, and I'm happy to hear from officers if they think they can add more to the question about the tree, and also the question about how the feasibility of developing this block, and also the enforcement, the questions that are being asked about. I mean, it's interesting if you design a house in two parts, what the future means for the use of those dwellings. So I'm happy to have any of those all and above answered, but at the moment it feels as though it's difficult to get them answered, and I am considering the idea of suggesting that we lay this on the table to get those answers. Thank you.
Thank you. CEO wishes to comment.
So just in respect to, there were two questions as I understand. So the question in respect to the tree I believe has been answered because the officer referred to the planning permit condition which requires that it be preserved and maintained. So that has been asked and answered. In respect to the method of construction, it's not a relevant consideration for the council to take in to considering the development application. That's a matter for the proponent to deal with his building surveyor and through the building permit process, and it's a matter for him to determine, or him or her to determine, the manner in which they construct the building. And it's not a planning consideration, and it can't be taken into account in terms of how we form a view as to how he's going to or she is going to undertake that construction. So just to be clear, that's a matter that really shouldn't be drawn into your consideration in terms of determining compliance with the planning scheme.
Deputy Mayor had a question.
Just in terms of clarity to ensure that we're talking about the same trees, I just wonder if the assessing officer could unpack condition 2, the vegetation management plan, and what indeed is contained within that, just so that Councillor Walker and others are satisfied that the tree versus other trees are going to be protected.
Thank you. Is that Duncan or Richard? Duncan.
Thank you. There are, as you saw when we went out on site this morning, several trees on the adjoining property and running down the boundary of the property. So this is on the adjoining property being number 10. So what we've asked, or what we're asking for by this condition, is that a vegetation management plan be prepared to show how, in accordance with the Australian standard, measures can be taken to protect those trees. Now those trees are on the adjoining property, so the specific tree that was being referred to by the neighbour and by a number of the other representatives is the elm tree approximately in the middle of the lot. But there are other significant trees or relatively significant trees close to the boundary, and so we're asking for a vegetation management plan to show what measures are going to be taken to ensure, for example, we don't get a large piece of machinery in there and just dig up the roots. So the tree's not going to survive that sort of impact, and we've specifically referred to the Australian standard. This is the same standard we used, Council will probably recall, when we dealt with the trees at a St George's Square development a year or two back. We have referred to this standard before. It's the best guide we've got, and it's then a matter for the applicant to come back with that plan.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, to speak.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, clearly by the conversations that have been going on, this is challenging for a lot of people. But I think we've got to be careful. We've got to get back. This is a planning issue, not a number of the other issues that we've been dealing with, and the construction of the building and how they're going to do it and all those sorts of things will come at a later stage. And as I say, we don't have the answers to actually how they're going to build the accommodation unit at the back at a later stage. That'll be something that they will need to determine and get appropriate building approval to do that. So I think that today it's two buildings of 100 square metres, which I think is 10 squares in my thing, which are not big houses. It's clearly a difficult block with a number of challenges associated with it, and I guess the proponent has tried to put forward suggestions and solutions on how they might want to build something on there. So whatever gets built on there will be challenging. We talk about Thrower Street as being short, and I know, and it's small and it's thin and all those sorts of things, and challenging, but so are lots of streets in and around Launceston. The issue with this in parking is that the parking requirements under the scheme are met, in that the block that you're going to live in needed 2 car spaces and it's got 1. The short-term accommodation at the back required 1 and it's got 1. So the reality of it is there. If somebody turns up in a camper van to park there and use it, then the answer is yes, there will be a problem in the city. But if somebody turns up in a camper van to visit somebody next door, it'll still be a problem as well. So the issues will be there, whatever's there. So this block at some stage will be developed and somebody will habit that block. So the question is this the best use of it? Our officers have done a really challenging assessment of it. There are 14 issues, I think, that have been raised and answered by the planning officers as part of this debate. I'm not a planning expert. I understand, and there are things that happen in my street I'm not always happy about. I've got a big tree that drops stuff all over me, but it's there, and I live there because it's in my street. So I have to deal with those sorts of things. So not everything's perfect in the street we live in, and when we move into a street that has undeveloped blocks, there will be challenges when somebody decides to develop it, because whatever we do, it'll be different. And the amenity that I once had before something was done on there will be different. And as a consequence of that, I will be challenged by some of the things depending on what what gets built. Sometimes I might be really happy about it, and sometimes I might. But the trouble is, when we have an undeveloped block, we actually don't control what the destiny of that block looks like, other than what the planning scheme allows us to do or not to do. I think the officer has gone through and explained how each of these things and the discretions that have been used under the planning scheme, how they've been interpreted by our officers. And I guess our decision is to trust or not his decisions or his view in relation to how those concessions have been done. As challenging as I might be, and I accept the comments made by the representor, and I've read some other representations that have been sent in regards to it, and I understand the passion of living there, and if I've got small children and things like that, I'm always worried about them running around on the street. I'm not sure that we're building this up to be bigger than it is. We are talking about 2 10-square houses, which aren't that big in the scheme of things, on a challenging block. So I choose to trust the developer and the planner and on the advice that he's given today, and therefore I'll be supporting the assessment.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to acknowledge the comments of the CEO in saying that as a planning authority we need to deal with the planning issues, and acknowledge what Councillor Mackenzie said in terms of not blowing it out of proportion to the item that's before it. However, when we have a tricky item to assess, where Councillor Mackenzie cited 14 issues that were raised and there are 8 elements of discretion. I think it does start to unpack the other layers to it, and in terms of making a clear decision, the complexity of it does get unpacked, and I think some of those other issues come into your consideration. However, although there are 8 elements of discretion, I think the application of this development to the site has been given regard to neighbours and area. When we were on site this morning and you look to the broader precinct of West Launceston, it's a very eclectic mix of design, of use of site, of scale, of all materials and forms, and I believe that the assessment of this item does seem that it appears to be, and I think we're hitting the mark of reasonableness, but it does reasonably meet the requirements of the scheme. But another word that Councillor Mackenzie used is trust. We've been burnt in the past as a planning authority where we have trusted the intention of a development application. We've approved it because it's met the requirements of the scheme, and then the uses have amended or things haven't gone quite to plan. And that in the past has been really challenging. So when you get these tricky items, you bring that to it. However, we have to assess this with a clean slate, and we do have to have regard for what has been submitted. Is it reasonable? Does it meet the scheme? Should it be approved? And in the future, if there are concerns, we need to address them. We need to build our capacity to assess whether things actually meet what's been approved in the future, in order that if we do find concerns, we can act on them. So this is tricky. I think all of the questions have been really valid and do need to be unpacked on what is a tight development in a small space, in a small street, with complexities. But when you bring it back to the specifics of the planning scheme and what's before us, it does meet the scheme, and it will require that what's been proposed happens. And I feel that the number of questions and the depth which it's been interrogated does give a clear message to the developer that there's a strong expectation of what is being submitted, if approved, is delivered, and no deviation from that would be accepted into the future.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close?
I will, and I do want to thank all of the other speakers and for those questions that were asked by fellow councillors. It's been an interesting discussion. I'd also like to thank those people who have lodged their objections, the residents of Thrower Street, who obviously love their neighbourhood and are concerned, and that's always good to hear that people are concerned about their neighbourhood. As a person who grew up in West Launceston, just up on the hill in Wilhelmina Avenue, I do understand the neighbourhood there, and playing cricket on the street was all part of my childhood. Probably not something you could do nowadays, but in Thrower Street you probably could. As Councillor Mackenzie said, this is really a planning decision for us to make, not a construction timetable decision. The proponent, Chris Terry, it was good to hear from him, to hear that he is going to live in the house on the lower level that will be constructed first. May mean that accommodation behind never gets built. However, he will have forever a lifetime approval for him or some subsequent owner to build it, and they'll still have the same challenges if he doesn't build it at the start. So to me, I'm happy to support this particular development, and I encourage all the others around the table, because despite the many questions we have, there are only 8 concessions that we have to, or planning discretions that we have to look at. The one for me that I thought was well handled by the development was to move it as far to the northern boundary and with the park to give as much room as possible from his neighbour at number 10 to allow, it didn't allow him the 5 metres. However, because of that being a double block and the trees, I feel that there would be no invasion of his privacy, even if he does build the accommodation at the same time as he builds his house. But obviously in the future those trees could be cut down, and so therefore it would open it up much more. But then the proponent of number 10, the occupant of number 10 has some control over his own privacy there. So I do commend this now to the table to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all those against. That's 1 against, the rest are 4, so that is carried. We're going to 9.6. We do have a few speakers for 9.6. Jodie Gauderman.
Councillors, I'm Roger Hill. I'm Jodie's partner. May I ask leave to speak first?
You're allowed to speak on her behalf?
No,
You're listed as well?
yes, I am listed as well.
You want to go first?
Yes, please.
No worries. Yeah, fine.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. The planning scheme has changed in recent years in order to provide more clarity for developers and for councillors, such that development applications would have a clear path to either success or failure, and that probably benefits everyone involved in the process, so you know what will pass and what doesn't. Okay. Now, with that backdrop, the development application at 33 Delamere will tower over and impose upon our property immediately to the north, resulting in a degradation to the privacy that we enjoy in our yard and loss of amenity. The council plans are issued in 2 dimensions, but we live in a 3D space, and we will have a development that actually looks down upon our private space. I understand that none of that matters. What does matter is that there are 3 areas that the council has discretion in this application. One of those is that the driveway exceeds 30 metres in length and requires a passing bay for vehicles to come up and access the other property. The second item is that the turning bay that's proposed is in the frontage of the proposal, and that doesn't strictly comply. And third, the private space that is required in a small or in a residential dwelling there's not enough space to comply with that, and moreover, the space that is afforded is on an elevated deck that will look directly down on our property. So the question I have for the councillors then is that if the planning scheme is designed to provide clarity and make it easier to have a yes/no decision, why then must this proposal be put through and rely on 3 discretionary matters that don't appear to have any solutions to them?
Thank you. Your time is up.
Thank you.
So Jodie speaking now.
Hello, I've lived at 35 Delamere for 15 years, and the adjoining properties are large blocks. I can understand the desire to develop in behind those blocks, but there's no housing along that back strip. It is the only reason those properties are purchased is for the size of the block. Now, the current development proposed is for a very large 4-bedroom house, and due to the elevation of the block beside us, it's actually 11 to 12 metres over the back of my house. The elevation has not really been considered in this. And also there's only a 3-metre driveway between the existing house and my house. So this is a shared driveway on a shared proposed subdivision. They are not proposing a double parking bay, they're not proposing a double garage. If the person in the back house, if this DA is approved, if a car is parked there, they can't get out. So I was very surprised that it was allowed to be subdivided in the first place due to the access issues. Yes, it's a very large development that will be equivalent to a 3-storied apartment right behind the adjoining properties, and the property behind also, we've had no consultation. I had difficulty ascertaining what the DA discretionary issues were when I phoned council twice. In the end, my husband had to ring Duncan 8 times in order to find out what the 3 discretionary applications on the planning were about. So the process has not been very transparent for us.
Yep, your time is up. Thank you. Lee Dell.
Hello, councillors. Just speaking on behalf of the development at 33 Delamere Crescent, in full support of the development. As the building designer, I congratulate the report that has been done through by the planners, and do agree that the three discretions to do with driveway access, parking in the front of the dwelling, and also some minor exclusions have been well dealt with, and the development substantially complies. The owner is planning to live there as a single residence, and her expectation that from a previous subdivision application that she can build her first dwelling on the block is considered not so much a right, but just that the passage of the planning scheme be applied so she can in fact build a dwelling on a block that has recently been subdivided. It is a modest home and she's working to a very tight budget, so all aspects of being compliant with the planning scheme have been carefully considered and in full support of the development. Thank you.
Thank you. So 9.6, that's all the speakers we have. Anyone wish to move a motion? Councillor Mackenzie moved as is. Seconded. Councillor Harris. Wish to speak to a Councillor Mackenzie? Question? Yes?
Just to respond to the comment regarding the driveway, is that part of the subdivided block and therefore effectively owned by the proponent? I mean, there was a comment that it was a shared driveway that somebody could park on.
Duncan.
The driveway is part of the title that we were talking about, part of the title at the rear. Whilst the developer of the house at the rear is the daughter of the people who own the house at the front, they can share the driveway amongst themselves, but at some point in the future it'll be completely separate ownership. And
But the driveway does belong to the back block.
The driveway belongs to the rear house.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. You wish to speak to?
I do now. Sorry, Mr.
Mayor.
Mayor.
Thank you.
Yeah, look, I hear the comments made by the people who live next door, but when I go through this application, there are actually very few discretions, and the discretions are probably minor, not in the view, I'm sure, from people who live below that house. Trevelyan's shaped like that, so anything that's going to be built on a hill is going to overlook something, I think, pretty much. This block, the driveway says it doesn't have a passing lane. I take the comments made by the planner in relation to that, in that there is clear sight lines from the beginning of the drive to the top of the drive, so if I was going to drive down, I'd be able to see if somebody was coming up, and therefore either abandon my desire to go down until that car came up. So I think that the issue of a passing lane isn't relevant in this particular issue. It might have been, had that land been a joint ownership of the property next door, such that somebody might have parked in front of it, but the reality of it is they'll be blocking somebody else's driveway if they actually park there, and I'm not sure that that's legal, as it's on their private property. You know, the turning at the beginning, at the front of the house, I think that is well covered on the basis that it actually isn't fronting the road face, and I think that's the intention of the condition, to have not that there, so that it was, if it was facing the front of the roadway, then it would be an issue, but the fact is it's actually facing the back of a house at the back, so I don't think that that's a major discretion. I think there was a minor building envelope, I think of 30 or 46, 60 centimetres, I think, of where the eaves of the house poked out beyond the building envelope, but when you look at the diagram, that's very minor in its scope. So the real key issue, I think, from the point of view of the opponents, is the overlooking aspect of it. The reality is the side setbacks all meet the requirements of the planning scheme, and therefore, as a consequence of that, the overlooking isn't an issue that we can actually take into account, because they actually meet the requirements of the Act in regard to that. If there's a privacy amenity, I think that's dealt with in the Act as well. Yeah, ultimately, I can't see any reason why this proposal isn't supported, because there are the discretions are as minor as I've seen in many that have come to this table.
Thank you. Question, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciating that the standards requiring council discretion are only 3 and may appear minor, the issue of a 3-storey, use the term as referenced in representations, watchtower in the backyard. I wonder if that, in terms of the metres above the neighbour's property, could we just unpack that a little further in terms of the slope and in terms of that site coverage that we'll see, I guess, what could be referred to as a 3-metre bulk at the rear, explained just a little further with reference to the slope, with reference to their rear courtyard and the neighbouring property.
Thank you. Duncan, is it?
Thank you for that. Yeah, look, I don't have the specific levels of the next door property and this particular design at hand, but effectively what the representatives are saying is that from their courtyard, or the courtyard at the rear of their house, which is significantly lower than the ground floor, so that is effectively from their courtyard to the floor of the proposed garage with this house, that would represent the first storey. The garage would represent the second storey and the house above represents the third storey. So from their perspective, they feel that they'll be looking at a 3-storey building, although it'll only be a 1.5.
Thank you. And I guess from their perspective, in terms of the impact and loss of amenity, that's where I was going with that. In terms of the assessment of that, do we still feel that, are we sure that the reasonableness in terms of the loss or perceived loss of amenity from what they will see is appropriate?
Duncan.
The perception of a loss of amenity is a very subjective thing, but in this case, when we're talking about the size and the scale of the building, for all intents and purposes, the building fits within the building envelope prescribed by the planning scheme. The deck at the front, where they're concerned that they may be directly overlooked from, is set back from the boundary, the prescribed levels. It meets all the acceptable solutions. We have no concept.
So what you're saying is because it fits within the envelope, those things are therefore not considered?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for the question on that one about the height. Yes, as others have said, this only has 3 discretions. As someone who had a 100-metre long driveway as a second internal block, in 27 years I reckon I met 10 cars coming in when I was going out, so it's not a big issue if you do have line of sight. So, and as we've been determined, it is in fact an owned driveway, not a shared one, so from that point of view, someone would back up. Whoever was further down the drive, I'd suggest, would end up winning that argument. Having said that, the house will be overlooking the 2 adjoining properties, but the siting of the house and the siting of the deck will in fact mean they probably won't. And I've said before in this chamber, I live in a row of 3 2-storey houses, which means I can look at either my neighbours' backyards, and I couldn't tell you the last time I didn't. The fact that I can, you never do. You tend to look where the view is, and that's exactly what I'm sure will happen in this one. And so, whilst I understand the residents' concerns about this particular house, it is a good development. It does meet all of the conditions. It has been very well designed. I'm not sure that a 4-bedroom house is actually modest, but maybe things have changed as proposed, as mentioned by the designer. But nevertheless, it is a home at the moment that will be owned by the daughter of the residents who live in front, and so, but it won't always be that way. But at this stage, that's the way that it is. However, we've got to look a little bit to the future and say one day those 2 houses will be owned by different families, one assumes, but even in that scenario, I'm sure that the new house built at the back will fit in, and after a period of time people won't hardly even notice that it's there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I do rise to actually support this development application, and just to make note that, as I was previously said, in other development applications we're going to be seeing more and more of these. In this instance, I do appreciate the the points that have been made by the representatives. Potentially the property at the rear of this development, which probably has fairly uninterrupted views at the moment, will have somewhat interrupted views. It might only be 15% of their view or so. I can appreciate that's something that you probably weren't expecting, and there's a loss of amenity. But all of Launceston, should expect that this can possibly happen anywhere in this town, and views are not one thing that are protected by the planning scheme. I think in a lot of ways this particular development is the appropriate use of this land. It's the process that we've gone through to have the subdivision and then to have the house development application put forward has resulted in what I would consider, an appropriate use. I see no overshadowing of people's houses or yards, minimal interruption, to people's amenity, and I agree with the seconder of the motion that I think it is something that, reasonably quickly will just become a part of that local neighbourhood. So, I will be supporting the motion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Thanks, Mayor. I'd just again like to acknowledge the people who spoke against the motion today, or against the DA today. I hear them, I understand them, but we sit here as a planning scheme and we have to make decisions based on what the planning scheme says. The amendments in this particular, the discretions in this thing are relatively minor in regards to it, so if this was to be appealed, I can't see how we'd actually be able to sustain that in an appeal. And I think at the end of the day, it is a good development. If I lived in that house, it'd be pretty good. You'd have a great view, and it meets all the setback requirements. And that's the unfortunate part. It may feel like 3 stories, but the reality is it is 1.5.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We now no longer sit as a planning authority. So move on to 10.1, Mayor's announcements. Just to announce that it was really great to go to the opening of St Michael's Smart Housing Accommodation. If you've ever been out there, or haven't been out there I should say, I encourage you to go and have a look. It's absolutely fantastic, the job they've done, how smart it is, how clever it is, especially for their clients, or their residents, like they might call them, who obviously have difficulties, disabilities, and yet they can, a lot of things are by voice, so they can do things by their voice, and it's really encouraging. So absolutely fantastic. It was great to see, and it's great to be part of the opening. Again, to the Vox Harmony Choir, it was great to go to some events this last few weeks, and fantastic. And I'm sure the Deputy will want to share with one in a minute, which I might mention briefly, but I'll leave it for him to share. But Vox Harmony was a fantastic performance, did a great job, and the Deputy was there as well. And also attended the Launceston College production of Flashdance last night, and fantastic again, their skills, and it's quite amazing. Every year I think I say it's great, it's getting better, but it keeps getting better, and that's very encouraging, and I think it shows a lot of talent, and congratulations to them for putting it on in these difficult circumstances. I think they've done a fantastic job, did very well, and it was very good at the end of the night. Our CEO, they did, the college recognise the support of council on stage, and I thought that was fantastic. So pass that on to the councillors and to our staff, that they did really appreciate the support for the theatre, but also for the port of supporting them as a college. So it's really appreciated, and they want us to know that, and that is fantastic. I'd also say on the Wednesday night I did attend the, which is not in here, the Premier's cocktail party with the Chamber, and there again it was a good evening, and the Premier was also speaking complimentary of council and the way that we've worked. He said we don't always agree on things, which is correct, but he likes the way that we can work together and do things together, so I'll pass that on. He said that publicly, which was fantastic. And also then just add that it was really great news yesterday for the Rampant decision on the Fragrance Hotel. I think that's very positive for our city, $80 million investment at this time, especially when the conditions, let's said in the Examiner, are but it's a very small but. It's not going to be a major issue, and it's something that with our staff working through, and I want to congratulate our staff on all the efforts, Richard and the team, that you've put into CEO and others that worked very, very hard for this one, and really appreciate that effort that you put in, and thank you for the work that's been done. It is appreciated, and I think it couldn't come at a better time for our city as well. Councillor reports. Deputy.
Thank you, Mayor. I would love to start by firstly recognising the wonderful young people that we had in the chamber today, representing themselves and their fellow YAG members, but also representing our Youth Action Group of Council. I think if ever we were wondering what YAG get up to, or the wonderful skills that are developed through YAG, we saw that today from the young people who were here presenting and asking questions of council, and we certainly acknowledge Dana and the great work that she's done in these last few months with the young people that we work with on YAG, together with the support of Councillor Daking and Councillor Mackenzie, who were there at the beginning as well. Mayor, the second thing I'd love to mention, if I could, and you touched on it with regard to events, but the success of Junction, perhaps the first large-scale event that we've seen in a very long time, and their ability to tilt, to shift, to work within a very complex and ever-changing environment to stage what was an incredible 3 days of Junction Hometown, recognising wonderful local talent, celebrating all that there is to celebrate about Launceston and Northern Tasmania in our beautiful square. So congratulations to the team at Junction, and thank you to our council staff for working so well with them. Mayor, also in that cultural space, I would love to recognise that a number of councillors, but more importantly, a great number of the public have attended the first weekend of the QVMag summer season, 4 brand new exhibitions. I don't know about other councillors, but there is a change happening at the QVMag, and it is a wonderful one. And the excitement and the feeling of change that was present by everyone who attended not only Friday's special opening, but indeed the opening day on Saturday, was one of welcome, one of this place is heading in a new direction, and I think that's certainly something that we as a council have been aiming for. So to Tracy and her entire team, congratulations on what is a fabulous start to the new direction that Tracy is wanting to take the QVMag in, and those 4 exhibitions, including Alastair Mooney's nest and that imposing bird in the entrance, is absolutely fantastic. You referenced it, Mayor, but as the Council's representative on the Launceston College Association, I would too like to reference the 100 on-stage students supported by a plethora of off-stage and musicians and staff who were able, in this very trying year, to return to the Princess Theatre for a second time this year to stage their annual production of Flashdance the Musical. And I'll pass around the program for others to look at. But, you know, staging a production with only 1/3 of the audience and ticket sales possible, it's a risky business, and that school, Vicky Mackerel, and the team were so committed to ensuring that those students had a wonderful opportunity. And as you referenced, Mayor, the production was absolutely incredible. The last 2 things I would love to mention, Mayor, are things in the northern suburbs. We had the opportunity to welcome grade 5 and 6 students from Youngtown Primary School into the mall for an incredible dance performance earlier on in the week. One of the initiatives that Sarah McCormick and the team have been doing in Youngtown is connecting the students at the primary school with cultural and recreational opportunities, including a dance school, and they came into the mall and shared that with an audience, and that was a precursor to a much larger Youngtown community flash mob. And if you're interested, the opportunity exists to register to be part of that. And the second thing and final thing, Mayor, was the opportunity to drop into the My Place, My Future Ignite Us leadership program while representing yourself, and to explore the journey that the participants from the northern suburbs are on with Dean and Danielle as they come to understand their own leadership skills and their potential within the community to enact change and bring about greater prosperity for themselves and for that part of our community. It was a wonderful hour, and I can't wait to see the transformational impact that that program continues to have on those people.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. One is just to acknowledge your opening with the passing of ex-Alderman Peck, and I just wanted to make my own personal comments about how much I enjoyed working with Tony over a number of years. His passion for Launceston was sort of, you know, it was amazing. He just sort of did everything he could for this city almost till the day he dropped. And the class that he went out with, I think, was absolutely amazing. I had the opportunity to meet up with him a few weeks ago. He wasn't well, but he was still interested in what was going on in the city and wanting to know what we were doing and why we weren't doing this and various other bits and pieces. So he was passionate right to the very end, but a person who was much loved and will be much missed, I think, from this community. So I'd just like to send my regards on to Debbie and his family as well. And it was a fantastic fight, and we're sad that he lost it in the end of the day. The second thing I just wanted to focus on, we are in our last meeting for the year. I'd just like to acknowledge the great work of the General Manager, or the CEO, and his team, and what Launceston has achieved over the last 12 months in so many ways. I think dealing with COVID, the development applications, you know, the things that we've done, we've been out there and we've led from the front in regards to all the things to keep this community operating during some very difficult times. And if we sit there and look at the things that have been achieved, there's been the number of development applications that have come in with regard to UTAS. Today, the great news that the Fragrance Hotel project has now come on board. And there are just so many other things that have happened in and around, not just in a development application point of view, but it just makes this city, makes me so proud to be a part of the city, a part of the team that actually is driving Launceston forward. And I think that we can look forward as a city to an extremely bright future, I think, as one of, I think the Mayor uses this on one of the best regional cities in the world. If we're not already, I think we're well on the way to doing that, and I think that's no small amount because of the people that work within this organisation and how the community have come in behind us. You know, we sometimes get things wrong, and I defy anybody to say they've never made a mistake. We do, and we'll continue to do them. But the reason we make mistakes is we're always continuing to try to do something. And I'm just so excited about being part of this city, living in this city and enjoying the things that it brings for us as a community. So I'd just like to congratulate the CEO and the whole council staff for what they've done. I know we'll do that at other stages, but I think in a public process, I think it's something we should do at the last meeting of the year. And that will just about do me, I think.
Thank you. Any other speakers on council reports? No? We'll move on. Questions? None on notice. Questions without notice from Councillor Spencer. Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. After working on King's Wharf for a couple of days this week, I've just got a couple of questions. Have we got any plans of cleaning up the Tamar River? And the second one, have we considered purchasing that dredge?
Thank you. Is that CEO or General Manager?
Well, I think if we obviously refer back to the city deal in terms of the question, have we got any plans to clean up the Tamar River? You know, so we've developed the River Health Action Plan and obviously been working for the last 18 months with with Taswater and the state government and the federal government around funding and sharpening up the actual River Health Action Plan to enable it to be implemented. So obviously that's been the bedrock of our focus. There's been work over the last 12 months where the $10 million worth of federal investment has been invested and spent in terms of making improvements in the upper catchment. So certainly trying to address the animals that are accessing the water and the impacts of agricultural activities and these type of things. So they're having great success with that, and it's been a good use of the federal money and will have an impact in respect of improving water quality in the longer term. And obviously we've been working with the other councils around cleaning up those cross connections where you have sewerage that is, been mistakenly connected into stormwater and those types of things over the years. So we've been working in that space. So in the new year, obviously we're a part of the Tamar Estuary Management Task Force. The task force has been working on preparing a report around options for the community in respect of sedimentation management moving forward. So we expect to receive that report from the task force early in the new year, and that will come to council for consideration, as it will be considered by the various parties that have an interest: the state government, the West Tamar Council, the chamber, and so on, that all have an interest in respect of how the the actions need to be implemented on the Tamar. So in terms of the question around the dredge, that will be answered further to receiving that evidence-based report, and then understanding what the TEMP's view in respect to those future actions. So I hope that's the question.
Very well done, except to mention the total amount, 130 million, is being spent on it, so it's quite a lot, as it will be.
Thank you.
Any other question? Councillor Walker?
Thank you, Mayor. Question to the CEO, or perhaps to our Infrastructure General Manager, in regards to the expansion of the floodgates at the Riverbend Park. Can the officers just explain how this came about? Were there alternatives for pedestrian access? Was it an oversight that we didn't have pedestrian access, or that entrance was too narrow? It seems to be that the reason being, it has created a danger zone for pedestrians. But yeah, just some rationale behind that, and whether there were any other alternatives other than widening it, which I imagine will come with some substantial cost.
General Manager Shane.
Since the very start of the project, it's always been the intent to widen that, to allow things like buses to get in, and also pedestrians. It's a solid structure. We could cut a hole somewhere else for pedestrians, but it was considered that it'd be of better integrity for the levee to just widen the gate.
Well, in that case, it's work that we're undertaking ourselves. It's not contracted out. It's not.
Yeah, the work's contracted out.
Yep. So it's been through the tender process.
Yes, it has.
Oh, okay. Thanks for that. And just another question to the CEO in regards to the acquittal of the digital innovation grants and the commencement. Just to ask if those grants have been acquitted, and when we might expect the commencement of an independent audit into the process of applying for and the awarding of an acquittal of those grants.
CEO.
Thanks, Mayor. So I had no prior notice to the question, so I haven't been able to obviously ask and seek the exact information in respect to the current status of the acquittals. I was certainly aware that they were coming in. We were expecting to see the last of them come in towards about now. So, and again, I'll have to check in terms of exactly the stage of the receipt. So what we're working on at the moment, obviously, we have to bring a terms of reference back to the council prior to initiating the audit. So that will happen in the new year once we have received all of the acquittals, and then obviously the council will be able to determine by way of the scope in terms of the timing and the expectations in respect of the delivery of the audit.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie, was there a question? Any other councillor with a question? No? We'll move on then. We go to Tender Review Committee, 13.1. Moved Councillor Cox, seconded Councillor McKenzie. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Cox?
Yeah, I probably do, Mayor.
Probably do.
I probably do. I probably should, probably more to the point. As the year draws towards an end, we seem to be getting busier and busier, which happens every year. The four that were relevant here were the Komatsu purchase of a new landfill bulldozer for the waste centre, the Golconda Road for contract work there, contract electrical for the solar installation at the Aquatic Centre, I'll come back to that in a moment, and the Crossroads civil contracting for the Quarantine Road curb and pavement. Three pretty straightforward. The contract electrical one caused a bit of a discussion. The decision to use one particular contractor who were also using a subcontractor caused some discussion. Councillor Spencer wasn't that delighted about it, but whilst he didn't support it, he's been pretty good with it so far. So we got those 4 through. I think we had 6 more this morning. And I just wanted to finish up by saying thank you to the staff, because it's not just 1 or 2 people who turn up to these tender review committees. There's a whole heap of council staff, and over the last couple of years, the information that we get now is far superior to the information that we used to have 3 or 4 years ago. We do it a little bit differently. I think we do it a lot better, and I would probably thank Councillor Mackenzie for that, because he drove, or was instrumental in driving the better information and the way that we do business. So all in all, I think we've had a pretty good year. I think we've got most of it right. I'd like to think we get it all right all the time, but that doesn't happen. So we'll look forward to seeing if we can get it all right next year.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie. Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. One of the ones with the buying the dozer, I'd like to see us probably, a lot of councils put their second-hand vehicles and machinery out for tender in the paper. It was a massive difference between the 2 prices that we got offered for trading, and I think we could get a better deal if we put some of our big machinery out for tender instead of selling it back to the suppliers. Thank you. Nice statement.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Cox, wish to close?
No, all set, thank you.
I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. So we do move on to 14.1. Move Deputy Mayor. Seconded Councillor Harris. Wish to speak to it, Deputy?
Never missing an opportunity. I just wanted to highlight that we had a presentation from Mona Foma with regard to the wonderful undertaking that will be occurring in our city before we reconvene as a council, and the collaboration and partnership between the City of Launceston and the staff to again pivot and change from a mainly interstate to a more intra-state event. Saw what Councillor Dawkins referred to this morning on the bus as tickets being sold out within 5 minutes. So we look forward to the January iteration of Mona Foma. It's been very, very successful for Northern Tasmania and for our Launceston, and as we come to the end of the initial agreement, we feel very sure that the state government will have noted the outstanding deliverables that have come from Mona Foma and look forward to that continuing there into the future. So all of the workshops are informative, but that one deserved a little bit of attention right now.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
I wasn't going to, but I will just mention the Launceston City Heart project, where the council staff took us out to have a look at it from the street. And I must say that I give congratulations to the council staff for doing so, because it did enable those of us who are able to attend to have a look at the street perhaps through different eyes, and look forward to seeing what the final plans are for the St John Street through to Patterson, from York through to Patterson Street on St John. Come back to. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 16.1, the Relbia feasibility study. Move Deputy Mayor, seconded Councillor Mackenzie. Deputy Mayor.
Just briefly, I'd like to say what an outstanding process this has been to see us arrive at this point. Reference is made to the initial public consultation that was undertaken, and obviously public consultation occurs in a variety of different ways, and lots of people come to public consultation often with a predetermined perspective. But I think what happened, and I had the pleasure of attending one of these consultation phases early on in the development of this particular study, was that the people were really generous because they wanted great outcomes for Relbia and wanted to see that Relbia, I guess, would be retained, but also to understand that change is inevitable. So I think the vision, and I would like to read into the meeting the vision in the report that we're seeking to release for further consultation today. The vision being Relbia will be retained into the future as a rural living lifestyle community, Relbia will be differentiated from other parts of our Launceston housing supply due to the presence of natural vegetation and wildlife, scenic character and views, larger lots and a sense of privacy. Existing and new non-residential land uses such as wineries will be encouraged to remain, and new tourism and related uses will be supported where they continue to the character and sense of place in Relbia. Where subdivision is supported, it will be site responsive and new housing will be encouraged to incorporate excellence in design and environmental sustainability. I think importantly, Mayor, that this point 2, this item today encourages further conversation with regard to the strategy and the vision, opening up a period of 8 weeks where the community have the opportunity to buy in and further provide their voice into the desires of Relbia. I'd really like to sincerely congratulate the staff who have seen us arrive at this point, because I think this is outstanding work, and I look forward to seeing how the community respond to the detailed report, and suggest that councillors support it, both points 1 and 2 today.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you, and I just think, just reiterating comments made by Councillor Gibson, that we as an organisation, and so it goes back to my comments I made in public comments that I made about, we get better and better, I think, at what we do, and I think this consultation process is another one where I think we've improved. We've sometimes not quite got it as right as the committee was, but I think we go out there with a listening view. We'll hear, and sometimes they'll tell us what we aren't doing right, and that's okay. And that's always a perspective depending on where you're looking at various things. But I think this process appears, and the feedback I've had from members of the Relbia community would say the process has been run really, really well, and they've felt they've been heard, and not just been sort of told this is the way we're going down. And again, the beauty about it is they still have their opportunity to have their further statement again for another 8 weeks, and I think that's great. I think the one comment that I had, and I know Councillor Harris has pushed this as well, is the ingress and egress out of Relbia, and in particular the Hobart Road access, is something that I'm continually hearing from people who say, I've been out there for 30 odd years and I drive out there and I think there's nothing coming, all of a sudden bang, there's nearly a truck on my backside. So I really believe as part of that consultation process we should make sure that we collect that data on our infrastructure entries and exits from Relbia to see what we may need to do, because I think we are going to need, we will need to do something as this evolves, and we're looking there for more blocks to come in there, and I think from a safety point of view we need to be conscious of what's been said by the people who drive in and out of there every day. So I think fantastic job everybody, and it's the job not done yet, but it's a really good process, and I'm knowing that the people of Relbia are respecting what we're doing.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris.
I'll only speak because Councillor Mackenzie stole my thunder about the need for a roundabout at Relbia on the Hobart Road intersection. It is something that has been one of my items of concern since I elected to council 2 years ago. Thankfully we have had at least some discussions about what could be possible on that roundabout, but I would encourage residents to again use this 8-week consultation period to perhaps raise that as an issue for them as well, because the amended plans will see a greater intensification of housing at that start of Relbia Road under the proposed changings, where we will probably see more of a smaller lot subdivision than what's currently there near the Jinglers Creek start. So it is something that has been a long and ongoing process, and look forward to encouraging the residents out there to have their say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor, wish to close?
Well, just briefly, and not only to have their say, but to interrogate what is provided in this wonderful document. And of course, the road safety audit and traffic impact assessment by Pitt and Sherry that's contained within certainly understands the limitations and the challenges. So definitely encourage all residents and those interested to interrogate the issues, but importantly to respond to the document, because lots of those initial conversations have already occurred. And I think what is clear is that the majority of residents were not supportive of broad-scale residential subdivision, yet there was an appreciation that Relbia did have some potential for growth. And what this document does is outlines a way forward with regard to that. It also unpacks all of those traffic situations and parameters that have been outlined today. So we don't need to start at the beginning again. We've already done that. The traffic impact statement and all of the rigour that's already been applied is contained within the document, and we look forward to residents and those who are interested responding to the document over the next 8 weeks.
Thank you, Deputy. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand, and that is all councillors present. That is carried. 16.2, the access framework. Sorry? Oh, the speakers. Ooh, whoops. I missed that. Sorry. Thank you. Greg Mallet.
Good afternoon all. I'm born and bred in Launceston, moved to Victoria, spent a lot of time there. 7 years ago I lost my eyesight. 3.5 years ago my wife and I moved back to Launceston. We live at Bangor in a rural area. The access plan hopefully will help improve the livability for those with disabilities in Launceston. Having returned to Launceston, I've noticed has changed significantly over the years that I was away, with a lot of inconsistencies with tactiles, with pedestrian crossings, and just general mobility throughout the city. To have these improved and have it consistent across the city would make it possible for me to go and meet friends for coffee in cafes and meet my wife for lunches within the city. It is quite a difficult town to get around with mobility because it's an old city. A lot of the buildings protrude into the general footpath, and this of course can't be avoided because of the age of the city. I'd like to speak in support of the community access plan, in the intention that it will improve livability and accessibility for those with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sheila Birchall.
I'll speak into the microphone. Can you hear me?
Definitely.
Well, I have to tell you that I could not hear you. I'm wearing hearing aids and I was sitting back against the wall and I could hear the rumble of your voices, but I could hear nothing comprehensible. So I don't think that's an adequate vocal system for you. I was asked to speak briefly about access to the town. I love Launceston and I come to the library regularly. I love the library. I think they're doing a fantastic job. As regards the swimming pool, I don't go anymore. It was too much trouble for me to get into it. There are too many inadequate measured access points. The steps are uneven. Anyway, I've forgotten about that. But with regard to my other transport, I have to confess I'm lazy and I use taxis and I find them fantastic. I love talking to them. Taxi drivers, they're all good linguists, which most of us aren't, and I find them really entertaining to talk to. So I enjoy getting about Launceston, but I don't do long distances until my kids come to pick me up. So that's it. thank you for waiting, but I'm sorry you've had to wait so long.
Thank you, appreciate that. David Morrell.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Councillors. As you can see, I'm a person who has a disability. I'm also the carer for my wife, Carol, who uses a wheelchair. So we obviously take a great interest in how Launceston works as a city for people with disabilities. I'm also busily putting my concerns into action in the community, being the Deputy Chair of Disability Voices Tasmania, which is a new organisation bringing together the voices of people with disability from across the state. And most relevant to this afternoon, I'm a member of the Council's Access Advisory Committee. And in that connection, I'd like to commend the work of my community colleagues on that committee, and also most especially the excellent support and leadership that we've received from Councillor Dawkins and from Council Officer Tracy Mallett, without whom the access plan that you see before you wouldn't be available for your consideration. Obviously, I commend the plan to you. I think it's a pathway to the future. Without a pathway, you'll never get to where you're going. Where you need to go, where I encourage you to go, is to become a city that is a leader in access and inclusion. Now, those are somewhat abstract words, but if achieved, they say, welcome to our place. Here you can live, here you can have a life of freedom, opportunity and amenity. And these are really worthwhile things to achieve just from the point of view of doing the right thing by the community. But beyond that, there also are the economic potentials of accessible tourism. Many people with disabilities are older, retired, have money in their pockets. The stereotype of the poor disability pensioner is in fact not accurate. And opportunities in retail, accessible streetscapes and shops open up many opportunities there, and opportunities in employment, accessible workplaces and open employer of choice approaches to recruitment and retaining staff. And in that connection, I could encourage the Council to become a leader in the recruitment and hiring of people with disabilities. A council should look like the community that it serves, and here is an opportunity to do that. And finally, in very particular, I would like to commend to you the notion of employing at some point a disability access officer to bring together all of the initiatives, to be the expert, to be the focus of problem solving. And I can say that I've seen that work extremely well as an investment for the Playford Council in South Australia, with whom my colleague Mike Taggart, my good friend Mike Taggart in fact, was their disability access officer for about 25 years, and that council was able to achieve many great things for people
thank you.
with
Your
disabilities.
time is well and truly.
And thank you.
Thank you.
I commend it to the council.
Councillor Dawkins is moved. Seconded Deputy Mayor. Do you wish to speak to Councillor Dawkins?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor. I believe this is another one of those instances when the community speaks for themselves. We've listened to the lived experience of community members who are on the Access Committee or who have fed into the report, into the Access Framework. There's so much that we can unpack from the work that's been done over the last couple of years, and there's so much work to do. But what this document represents is it's practical, but it's also high level, which is, I think is what we should be looking for from so many of our strategies. We want to understand the legislation that we work within, we want to understand what we're already doing, but we need that real grassroots community understanding of what it is to live within these kind of constraints. I don't think any of us can really understand, though it is of course clear that not all disability is something that you can see. There are so many hidden disabilities, and none of us should ever make a decision based on a judgment, looking at somebody that you understand what their life is. So there's much work to be done. I want to commend the work of the community representatives. They bring such depth to that table, and without them we wouldn't have been able to do this. And especially to you, David, you're one of the most articulate people that I've listened to in many, many, many years, and I believe there's a place for you in community leadership, which I understand through the pandemic. There was an article in the local newspaper dedicated to your experience, and without those stories we wouldn't understand what it is that we need to do better to support our entire community. So we've taken from this, there are 5 key priority areas, and we're now beginning to populate those key priority areas with actions. Some of those we will fight for budgetary line items, and some of them we'll be able to implement without excess operational budget. So I think that's important as well. We've got to be able to work within our constraints. You know, we're not going to come to you and say, we want the world. We know we can't have that, but we do want something, and we do expect to see movement by the end of 2024. When this access framework is to be implemented, we expect to see some budget items put aside for this very, very important work. So I think thinking about the access officer, that's something that it ticks a couple of our boxes here. So we can bring lived experience into the community, council community, but we can also start to advocate for people who need advice. You know, this is my problem, who do I speak to about that? You know, how do I access that information? That's something that we could do on perhaps a 0.5 to start with. We're not asking for an enormous amount of money here, but we are asking for movement in this area. The way that our documentation is presented, and today, the way that our meetings are presented, I mean, that is a perfect example of what we're not doing. We need to move through this access so we can get to more inclusion and a way that we can really promote and applaud the diversity within our community, because we don't, and we're not right now. I know we're not, because we talk about this, we sit around this table, we reflect each other, we consistently reflect each other. We very rarely see people who are different, and it's very, very important to see our community reflected in all levels of decision making. That's the way forward for a progressive, understanding, compassionate, kind, contemporary community, and that's the way forward for our community. So I know we're going to get unanimous support for this today. This is not contentious. It's modest and it's real, and I'm extremely grateful for the work that's been done by council officers. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor?
Well, I honestly say that I don't think there is a lot more to say, because Councillor Dawkins, through her words and her actions, together with staff, the 6 lived experiences that are included within this document and the contribution of David speak to the matter at hand. I think, though, for me, that this is about improving the lives and opportunities for people within our community. It's about making a difference, and it's about seeing that those that every day go about their lives with a disability have so much to give, have so much to share, and want to contribute. They want to shop, they want to have a coffee, they want to walk through our civic square and our mall, just like everyone else does. I think the framework is about how we can work as a council to ensure the best possible life outcomes for all our residents and those with a disability, and importantly for those who are caring with people with a disability. And I think it's important to note that we already do some great things in this space, but it's just the beginning, and there is so much more that we can do to be accessible and to be inclusive. And I think, as we've heard Councillor Dawkins say, this draft strategic framework, together with the implementation plan that will follow, could be a leading document in terms of Tasmania. We know that already this access framework, including the lived experiences and the rigour that's contained within it, is a bit of a leader within the state of Tas, but of course it's only when the words turn into action that we can celebrate that. And I know, with the tenacity of Tracy and the team, together with the outstanding committee led by Councillor Dawkins, that we will be celebrating achievements for those in our community who currently have barriers in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie?
Yeah, I'd just rise just to commend the people who have put the work into this. I used the word earlier today during a development application about community and care in relation to sort of the joining up of community in relation to people who live in affordable housing. That connection also goes to people with disability. I mean, most of us in this room don't know how it works because we don't have those issues to deal with every minute of every day, which someone, listened to Sheila, and I hope what we were saying was only because she couldn't hear us and not because of what we were saying. I'm disappointed that didn't work better for her, and that just shows a very simple example. But I think the beauty about it is we care. We've actually gone and we've got a plan to action, and now on whatever page it is, 33, we actually have a step 2, which is the development the action plan, and really that's where it all starts. I mean, we've got the notion, we've heard and listened to the community and a really broad base of community people who have either dealing with disability themselves or caring for people with disability, and so we've got the right people in the room giving us the guidance. I endorse the comments about a disability officer who actually brings disability, real disability to their thought processes because they actually are suffering from it or know, from lived experience. And then the implementation and monitor, I think, they're all the 3 things. And I think that, again, I come back to the council, we are not starting out to sort of do a lot of words. We actually do with everything. We're actually now putting things in there behind it, which says we actually have to do something about it. We can do all these lovely glossy documents, which some of your people can't read, and so it's just fantastic that we're our people. That's thank you for picking me up. Our people, don't get the benefit of, but I just think it's great that we're doing this, and I think I'm so excited to see where we go with this, and that just brings us back to being a much more inclusive community.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Dawkins, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 18.1, lease and licence. Someone happy to move that? Councillor Mackenzie. Is there a seconder? Councillor Harris. Wish to speak to it? Councillor Mackenzie?
Yeah, I do. Only this relates to an item that we spoke about earlier, which was the development application in regards to the Silos Hotel, of which there are a couple of elements of that development that requires access to public land. These little things that are in light blue are showing where they interface with that, and there is a fee associated with accessing the licensing of the land. And I guess, from my comments, the most important thing is I think that the proponent pays for the costs associated with doing the documentation, which might be the lease or the licence. And as I've said previously before, if there's internal work that we do, we need to make sure that we're upfront and tell the proponent that there are hours that are put in by officers to do things, and I think we should be looking to recoup a reasonable charge for the work that our people do to save them having to have external people do things for us. So I support it, and I appreciate that some of these will bring it down onto public land, which they may want to use that public land for part of the activities that they do, but that's something that we will need to agree at some future date. But it just, again, makes that property accessible to the public realm by having egress and ingress from council land. So I think that there's been a valuation done for the appropriate charge for that. So I think that's, I endorse what's been done.
Thank you. Councillor Harris?
Only to say, yes, I also support this because I think it will open up the silos to the Riverbend Park in a much better way. It will provide access directly and also stop a lot of damage to the existing grass and garden areas where people are making their own pathways because there isn't one. So this is a sensible decision for the council to make to enable people to get the best use out of both the Riverbend Park solution, Riverbend Park playground, I should say, and also the silos building.
Not for me. Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. That is all councillors present. Are the councillors happy to keep going, or do you want to have a break? Yep. Thank you. 18.2. Councillor Mackenzie moved. Seconded. Councillor Harris, thank you. you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I do, and thank you for the work that's been done again in regards to this. This is just about 2 strips of land, which will enable a potential submission for a future development. But at this point in time, that is a separate exercise, and I think if we read through a number of the representations, they actually don't relate to the issue at hand. That's a future step that they'll need to consider. And it's interesting when we reflect back on the Relvia plan that actually this block of land is actually designed to turn into rural residential land, I think, in the planning scheme or the proposed planning scheme for that. But that's another day for us to have that conversation. This is the first step, which is enabling the person who owns the land to buy sufficient land to be able to put an appropriate road into the subdivision should that be approved. But that is a future thing that we need to deal with. The only issue I think that really is of relevance is the trail and people's access to the trail that goes around Glenwood Road and around into Opossum Road. And certainly I think it's conditioned, or will be conditioned, that the road or the land that we're selling will still be open for people to use it as the Relvia Trail, and they'll just traverse across that. The difference is the horses might have to walk on some pavement rather than the dirt, and I think that's probably for 3 or 4 metres. So I think this is a very sensible issue. The broader issue in regards to subdivision and things like that is for another day, and that was what most of the representations were focused on, and they'll have their chance to have a say when that comes out.
Thank you. Question from Deputy Mayor.
Just briefly, and following on from Councillor Mackenzie, the purchaser has indicated their intention to maintain public access over the land. From a legal perspective, the conditions that are included, we're satisfied that that can be defended and carried out.
Yeah, the existing right of carriageway is not changing, so there's no change to the existing rights. There were no obstructions at the time of the grant of the right of carriageway, and therefore it would be unreasonable for the purchaser to now put up any obstructions as a result of the sale. So it doesn't appear that there will be any issues as a result of this. So there's no intention to change any existing use of the Glenwood Trail, and I think everyone agrees that everyone wants it to remain open for enjoyment, and that's what Council will definitely be endeavouring to ensure as well.
Thank you. Councillor Harris, wish to speak? Any other councillor wish to speak? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 18.3, proposal of park and reserve names. Someone happy to move? Councillor Mackenzie moves. Seconder, Councillor Finlay. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
I think it's a very sensible thing to do and clear up any confusion that may exist.
Thank you, Councillor Finlay. Any other councillor wish to speak to it? Councillor Walker?
I will speak to it, Mayor, just briefly. I'm not sure how these confusions come about, but I will say anecdotally from my experience, when there was a digitising of a lot of street names and things like that, I did experience that with my own street name, where how it ended up appearing was different to how it had always been called. So I suppose that other people, may have experienced that as well, that there's a colloquial name. I don't see any in this list that particularly stand out that are going to cause any confusion. I think it's just clearing up that confusion. I'd be interested to know what some of the other names were for these places, but we don't see that list, so it looks all very straightforward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 18.4, accelerated capital works. Move Councillor Finlay. Second to Councillor Mackenzie. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Finlay?
Just quickly, thanks Mayor. We have on a number of points today talked about the speed at which Council made early decisions to support our community through the recovery and care package. I actually really commend Council, particularly for the second part of this recommendation. It's great that we've got through the first half, the first tranche of the works, but to recognise that an amendment to the dates to achieve that second half of it, I think is appropriate given what we're hearing across the entire community about the extraordinary amount of work, which is fantastic, but actually there's all sorts of other impacts of that, so I think it's a good decision for us to make.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. And look, I think I acknowledge the comments made by Councillor Finlay, because I think that's 100% right. We were there to actually add as a catalyst to the community. We've done that, and now the community's taken over, and that's great. And I think if we don't slow it down, it'll actually to be our detriment. We're already finding with tenders, the number of tenderers that are putting in for things that we're doing are not the numbers that we used to, which is good because it means they're busy doing something else. So I think that it makes good economic sense, as well as I think probably taking away a bit of the fatigue for Shane and his team on the, they've worked tirelessly to get projects out and up and running, and I know how hard they've been working, and particularly as we haven't necessarily had a full complement of staff to run those things through, so people are doing lots of things. So I hope it just gives us an opportunity to draw breath and actually just focus on making sure we deliver the projects that we've got the best that we can, and then if we need to do some things, if things get a bit tight later on in regards to the community, we've still got some capacity to do that. So I think there's a very sensible way we're approaching it.
Thank you. Any other speakers? I'll put the motion. Those in favour? That's all councillors present. That is carried. 19.1, long-term financial plan. Move Councillor Mackenzie. Second to Councillor Finlay. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie?
Again, I think it bears speaking to, because there's been a lot of work put into the long-term financial plan by a lot of people in the council chambers, so I just really want to really stand to acknowledge the work that's been done. We've had a number of workshops where we've tested things, we've challenged things, we've questioned, and we've had answers to all those sorts of things. And I think that that the staff are to be commended with the plan that they brought up, and I think probably it's more in depth than most plans, if they even exist in a lot of other councils around the state. So I think well done, everybody. And as we can see there, that plan doesn't mean that's what's set in concrete. It's something that will get reviewed on an annual basis or an as-needs basis, and I guess the deck chairs are able to be shuffled around as changes are required from our organisation. And again, the capital works plan is something that probably would have accelerated some of the things that were out in the outer years, brought them forward, and now some of those will shuffle back now because of we don't need to do those so far. So I think well done, everybody, and I just commend the plan to everyone.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mayor. I wasn't going to speak, but something that Councillor Mackenzie said, I really enjoy working with Councillor Mackenzie across a lot of the financial aspects of council, like audit and finance and others, and I love the way as a whole organisation, our staff and us as elected members have worked on this for a really long time. I think it's a really serious piece of work, and it bodes us well for the future. However, the moving of the deck chairs, I think the fact that we have actually reviewed this and we've spent so much time interrogating and checking in on what that long-term path is, what we're actually seeking to do is to set a pathway and to not necessarily move the deck chairs from year to year, although it will be reviewed from year to year and set forward again, because what is quite serious about the adoption of this is that we're committing to a pathway going forward, which is not necessarily comfortable. And so if we find comfort that we can move it every year, so I'm sort of like cheekily responding to your comments. Yes, that is true, but I think what we need to do if, as councillors today, we make this commitment, we're making a commitment to a tough pathway of financial decisions into the future in order to best support our community, and I think that's the decision that we're making today.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie wish to close, no doubt he will.
I have to respond to that. And again, sometimes my language skills aren't that good, but my moving of the deck chairs is actually still within the framework of the long-term financial plan, in that, yes, we have a plan, but like all things, you have to be flexible and adopt and adapt, and that's what we do.
Thank you. We'll put the motion. Those in favour? Step ahead. Well, that's all councillors present. That is carried. 19.2, delegation of the council. Someone happy to move that? Councillor Harris, seconded. Councillor Mackenzie. You wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris? Councillor Mackenzie. Any councillor wish to speak? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.3, delegation of council to council officers. Moved Councillor Mackenzie, seconded Councillor Harris. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Mackenzie? Councillor Harris? Any councillor wish to speak to the item? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. 19.4, Crown Leafs Home Point Parade. Moved by Councillor Finlay, seconded by Councillor Mackenzie. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Finlay. Councillor Mackenzie?
Just my question's really, I guess we're entering into a 10-year arrangement with the state government. I'm just not quite sure whether we've actually approved a lease to the subtenants at this point in time. And I guess my question really is, I think our standard practice with council is 5-year leases for most things within our remit. I think trying to get back to a standardised thing. Is it the intent that because we've leased it for 10 that we'll lease that for 10 years to the subtenants in due course, or we'll be doing rolling 5-year periods?
Thank you.
We're still in negotiation with the tenant at this stage. 5 years is our standard. We'd be bringing it back to council to make those decisions anyway. So, but at this stage, it'd be a 5-year lease.
Thank you. Any other speakers or questions? Councillor Finlay wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Go to 19.5, Creative Cities bid. Move Councillor Finlay, seconded Deputy Mayor. Councillor Finlay, you wish to speak to it?
I do, thank you, Mayor. I think it's really exciting that we have this item before council today, which has been quite a long time in development. And over the last 5 or more years, and in recent years, council's been really strategic in the big plans that we've brought together for the community. Just recently adopting our cultural strategy. And I think this piece of work has the potential to weave together all of the big ideas and the big strategies for our community and find a place where lots of different people in different industries, different sectors and different strategies can come together. So I fully support the recommendation before us today. I believe that all the work we're doing around brand, reputation, all the work we're doing in our cultural strategy in our northern suburbs with the UTAS, the work that Ferment Tasmania are doing, but it's great, a bit like the river work that we're doing. We've got people at the table like TFGA, we've got the Regional Development Australia at the table, we've got some really interesting, we've got Harvest at the table, there's lots of people Design Tasmania. It's not just about what could be perceived as the elite of food with the title gastronomy, but it's actually about our community and how we can lift together and raise together all sections of our community that engage in some way with food, whether it be bringing family together, whether it be about understanding how to grow and use and cook, whether it be about the excellence of preparing and presenting and therefore being a destination with international regard to bring people in to come and explore what it is that we have in this region. So for me, I fully support this bid and that council endorse this. I recognise that the requirements of UNESCO are that it's a city council that support the bid, but in fact it's the work of the committee and of this area to recognise that it must be the region that benefits. One of the things that I love about the working group is they've recognised right from the beginning on day one that we want to set up a structure with a series of actions and a series of projects that will deliver for this region even if we don't get the declaration of being a city of gastronomy, because it's that actually that is already existing and already so strong in our community. So this will be sort of like the icing on the cake, but what it's done is have a forum for all of us to come together at the table and work together. So for me, I think this is really exciting. It's come at a time, if it had been 5 years earlier or 5 years later, you know, I think there's sort of the perfect storm happening at the moment where we're recognising the integration of all of these different elements, whether it be our farmers, our producers, our designers, whether it be Indigenous community and the tools of food. There's so many different things that are rich in this. that at the moment the small ask in terms of providing our principal in support is here, that we endorse that the bid go ahead, and that we look how we can work with the region to fund this ongoing in a way that we can really cement and embed all of the great things that are happening in the region under what will be an internationally regarded title of a city of gastronomy.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, to follow Councillor Finlay, I really think this is a game changer, and I would encourage anyone who is just looking at this as a request for money, notwithstanding today it's not about the money, to dig much deeper, to look at all of the strategies that we as a council have identified as our priorities, and to see that if this was successful, even if it wasn't successful, the journey taken to arrive at that point aligns so beautifully with all of the things that we are trying to do. So I would encourage, if you've got doubts, if you've got questions, if you don't understand it, to dig a little deeper, because I truly believe this has the capacity to strategically achieve so many of the things that we are wanting to do. And I believe wholeheartedly in the committee, I believe in the work, and I look forward to them continuing to explore financial partners, because this for us is a game changer and must be supported.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, and I rise to support the motion as well. Again, given we're doing it in principle, so the money will flow later on, and I think that'll be a thing, a separate exercise as we go forward, and I like the fact that the committee is going out to the broader region to seek their support, and I hope that they fall in behind it. My only word of caution, or not caution, it's more just a question to some extent, is really we've done a lot of work on our brand, and I'm just concerned that we just don't sort of have, and we just add another thing to it, that we actually don't get confused as to what we're branding ourselves, and this hopefully is going to feed back nicely into that branding exercise. But we spent a lot of time and money and effort getting branding before this actually came probably onto our radar. So the question is how that now feeds back into that effort, so that the work that we've done on branding actually comes and actually means something. But I can see you're chuckling there, Councillor Gibson, but I'm just conscious that this is just another thing that we might end up branding Launceston as, and I'm happy with that, but make sure that it's encompassed in our total sort of persona, rather than sort of another little cherry pick of something that might be a good idea. So I could probably just ask as a question as to how that might be.
CEO will answer that.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Obviously, the branding work is still to be completed in respect of it, and certainly Leanne's better placed to probably talk to it than I. But my understanding of what we're proposing in the branding work is to have an overall branding scenario or arsenal, if you like, a set of tools that are able to gel together our own brand for the city, for the council initiatives, for business initiatives, for initiatives such as the UNESCO program, that they're able to encapsulate that brand and use it in their own ways in a consistent and in a consistent and strategically aligned way that we haven't got at the present time. So I think the argument around having competing brands, we want to be able to have a common brand that can have provide the backbone, if you like, where others can use the same sorts of initiatives and tools that we'll be using ourselves as council. So,
thank you, Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few words on this. I have been following it since I first heard about it and think it's a very interesting concept. It is quite high level to me, even though I know there is the depth of real experience around the table, and I really, that breadth of experience is what's really giving it my endorsement at the moment. But I think it's really important for us to remember that when we're talking about food and gastronomy, that we still live somewhere where so many people are food insecure, and that can take so many forms. So as we progress on this, I think we have to always include the entire community, because we can end up speaking this it's quite elitist in some ways to discuss how the delicacies of food and the perfection of wine. It is something that we do so very well, but it's not everybody in the community will enjoy this. And for the substantial investment that we're going to need to make to continue developing this, I think it's got to be in every turn considered that we feed the entire community while we're talking about feeding the most exquisite and delicate things just to some.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. I suppose more of an observation. I note that Council's recommendation is somewhat predicated on the concept that other councils would also be supporting this project. Do we have an idea of what those other councils are? Are we talking just the Tamar Valley? Are we talking the broader Northern Tasmanian region, including Northern Midlands or Dorset?
Dorset.
May I suggest?
Yeah, I think it's just our region, the 003 region, the old 003.
I might just point out, I mean, the decision, if it's made today, is still, it doesn't commit, you don't necessarily need all of the councils to be on board with respect to the funding. What it says there is that all the funding partners have been fully explored. So I guess the council's wanting to have more surety around who's been approached and who's signed up and what the actual funding ask is and what the buy-in is across the, not just local government. I expect that would be private and other operators throughout the region. So.
Thank you.
Oh, well, I'll just finish speaking. Sorry, that was more of a...
That was a question. Do you want to speak there? You don't have to.
I do briefly, thank you, Mayor. It's just that obviously the Tamar Valley has, traditionally been that sort of marketable area that we've focused on over the past few years. I mean, we could go back in history to the early 1800s when it was, the Northern Tasmanian food bowl that helped to keep Sydney afloat, when they were suffering from food shortages. And that involved out on the plains outside Launceston, the supply of food that went up to Sydney. So there's a long history there. I'd just be interested to see how, our vision of the Tamar Valley, I suppose it goes to what other councillors have spoken of, and that not confusing that message of our region. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Do you want to comment?
I can provide some more background.
Yep, feel free.
Thanks, Mayor. I appreciate it. I just realised I'm probably the person in the room who's been on the journey for most of the time. My understanding is conversations have already been held with West Tamar, Meander Valley, I think Georgetown, possibly Northern Midlands, but I've stepped away from the project a little bit. In terms of food security, the project, the term gastronomy is in its broader sense. It's not just about the high end. The committee is very, very conscious about the value of food security and of working together with the people working in that space. And I forget what the other thing was I was going to provide an update on, but the branding, sorry. The way that the brand has been developed is that the bid very much would feed on the brand. So we would work with the committee to help them to weave the brand through the submission before it was made.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Finlay, wish to close?
Yeah, I'd love to close, thank you, Mayor, and address some of the issues raised within the discussion. And I was hoping maybe to be a little clearer when I spoke at the beginning. At the heart of the whole committee and this whole bid is people and family and food security. It's actually for the UNESCO delegation of gastronomy, unfortunately that's what it's called, but from the very first day it was always talking about access to food, sharing food, bringing community together around food. And of course it's all based out of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is very much about that. So absolutely commitment from everybody is almost sort of this like step back from the word gastronomy, although that's what we have to call the bid. So that's very much at the heart of the work that's done by the whole working group and all the members of the working group. In terms of brand and brand alignment, I think that's a really good point to raise. And just recently we were acknowledged as the most generous city, or we want to be a child-friendly city, and we want to be a city of gastronomy. I think those things all sort of package in around an overall brand, and there's definitely... Oh, Yeah, the answer, sorry, I thought you'd gone. What Leanne mentioned about how as our brand work evolves and this bid gets prepared, hopefully there'll be some information that can cross-inform that, how it goes together. But I see it absolutely a key part of our brand work in any case around food. And the last point I suppose I wanted to raise was that the people that have been brought together around the table are both very strategically intelligent and committed and passionate about community and food, and so any sort of strategic alignments that are due to be made around different strategies and brands will be very much top of mind, and a lot of those people are already involved quite actively in those other works as well. So I'm not sure that there's much opportunity for this project to derail from those, but all of that feedback will be taken on board and worked through as the bid is finally prepared.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. Move on to 20.1, report on the AGM. Somebody happy to move the motion? The motion, Councillor Harris moved, seconded Councillor Mackenzie. Wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris?
No, I think the report says it all very well. The AGM was over and done with surprisingly quickly. Actually, it was over and done with half an hour, I think.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie?
I'd just like to really echo the presentation that we actually had on, that's right, I'm just pointing, that's where it was. The presentation we received, I think, on the day of the AGM, I thought it was excellent bit of work, and it's, I think, very useful for the community to see. Actually, I think it really gives a really good snapshot. So I congratulate the preparer of that thing. But I think that, as AGMs go, I think we're one of the few that actually had one this year. I think most of them got COVID dispensations. Again, it's a pity that we have an AGM, full stop. But if we're going to have one, it'd be nice if we had a few more people from the community join us.
Well, it probably says something about AGMs, but anyway, 2 people turn up. Okay, we'll move. Any other speakers? Councillor Harris, wish to close? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We go into closed council. Somebody move a recommendation that we're going to close. Move Councillor Mackenzie, second to Councillor Harris. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We're now going to closed council. I never have that motion.
Oh, no, they do it this week.
Have you got the motion?
There.
Thumbs up, so we're back on air, back public, in open council. We have a recommendation there at the 21.1 and 21.2 and 21.3 with a brief description. Someone happy to move that motion? Councillor Harris moves, seconded Councillor Mackenzie. All those in favour, please raise your hand. And that is all councillors present. That is carried. We'll close the meeting.